What if you could see the future, not through a crystal ball or tarot cards, but through the incredible foresight of visionaries who, against all odds, predicted the world we live in today? Imagine being laughed at for suggesting something as outlandish as a global communication network, where every person on Earth could share information instantly. Yet that very idea, once dismissed as pure fantasy, is now the reality we hold in our pockets every single day. These aren't just lucky guesses, they're profound glimpses into the possibilities of human imagination and intellect, moments where someone's bold vision bridged the gap between the impossible and the inevitable. Welcome to a journey through time where we uncover 30 of the most astonishing historical predictions that surprisingly came true. From ancient philosophers who mapped the stars to Victorian novelists who envisioned technology centuries ahead of their time, these stories reveal a fascinating truth. Humanity's greatest innovations often begin as a spark in someone's mind long before they become part of our everyday lives. This exploration isn't just about celebrating these visionaries, it's about recognizing that the boundaries of what we believe to be possible are constantly being redrawn by those daring enough to dream beyond their era. So settle in and prepare to be amazed, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about history, progress, and the power of a single idea. Together, we'll travel across centuries and continents, meeting thinkers, writers, and inventors whose predictions seemed absurd in their own time, but now stand as testament to the incredible potential of human curiosity. Whether it's a world connected by invisible networks or machines that mimic human thought, these aren't just stories of what came true, they're invitations to wonder what might still be waiting just beyond the horizon of our own imagination. Our journey begins not in a laboratory or a corporate workshop, but in the quiet, ink-stained pages of a Renaissance genius's personal notebooks. Centuries before the Wright brothers would achieve sustained flight, a man named Leonardo da Vinci was meticulously studying the flight of birds, the anatomy of bats, and the principles of air resistance, sketching designs for machines that would allow humans to conquer the skies. His work on this was so extensive and so detailed, it fills over 35,000 words and 500 sketches across his codices, a project he pursued with an intensity that bordered on obsession. For his contemporaries, these were likely seen as the fascinating but fanciful musings of a brilliant but eccentric mind, beautiful drawings of impossible things. Perhaps his most famous aerial design is the ornithopter, a machine with massive, membranous wings modeled directly after the anatomy of a bat. Leonardo understood that human muscle power alone would never be sufficient for flight, so his design even included a mechanism for the pilot to use their legs and arms in tandem to generate the necessary power. While a human-powered flapping machine was ultimately not the path to successful aviation, the principles of aerodynamics he was exploring were absolutely fundamental. He was grappling with the same core challenge that all early aviators would: how to generate lift and overcome the force of gravity. But his imagination didn't stop with flapping wings. He conceptualized an aerial screw, a device that looks astonishingly like a modern helicopter or drone. His design called for a spiral rotor made of linen and wire that would be rotated fast enough to compress the air beneath it and lift into the sky. He even theorized about a pyramid-shaped parachute made of sealed linen, writing that it would allow a man to throw himself down from any great height without sustaining any injury. In 2008, a modern daredevil actually built and tested this exact design, jumping from a hot air balloon at 10,000 feet. The result, it worked perfectly, descending with a smooth stability that surprised even the engineers, proving that Leonardo's calculations, made over 500 years ago, were not just artistic whimsy but were grounded in a profound, almost intuitive understanding of physics. What separates a wild guess from a true prediction is the methodology behind it, and that's where Da Vinci's true genius lies. he wasn't just dreaming, he was applying a rigorous process of observation and scientific inquiry. He dissected birds to understand the structure of their wings and the function of their feathers. He studied air as a fluid, understanding that it had substance and resistance. His predictions for flight came true not because he was magically prescient, but because he was one of the first true scientists, using empirical evidence to extrapolate future possibilities. His work served as a direct inspiration for pioneers like Igor Sikorsky, the father of the modern helicopter, who studied Da Vinci's sketches. So the next time you look up at a helicopter or step onto an airplane, remember that the spark for that journey began in the boundless imagination of a Renaissance painter who dared to look at a bird and see a blueprint for humanity's future. While Leonardo da Vinci's predictions were born from scientific observation and sketches, our next visionary used the power of storytelling to launch humanity's imagination toward the stars, crafting a narrative so precise it would read like a mission briefing a century later. In 1865, decades before the first airplane even left the ground, the French author Jules Verne published From the Earth to the Moon, a work of fiction that meticulously outlined the journey that NASA Apollo 11 mission would follow with uncanny accuracy. Verne didn't just predict that we would go to the moon, he seemingly drafted the instruction manual. The parallels are nothing short of breathtaking. Verne's spacecraft, named the Columbiad, was launched from a site in Florida, a state that would, of course, become the home of the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral. His crew consisted of 3 astronauts, just like Apollo 11's team of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. He described the profound sensation of weightlessness his characters experienced during their journey, a phenomenon that was pure theory in his time. And in perhaps his most stunning foresight, Verne's capsule returned to Earth by splashing down in the ocean, where it was recovered by a waiting naval ship, a procedure that became the standard, safe method for bringing American astronauts home. But how did a 19th-century novelist writing by gaslight manage to plot a course so accurately? Verne was a master of what we might now call science-based speculation. He was an avid reader of scientific journals and surrounded himself with the leading minds of his day. He didn't invent his ideas from thin air. He took the established physics of his time, the laws of motion, the principles of ballistics, and stretched them to their logical, thrilling conclusion. He calculated the escape velocity needed to break free of Earth's gravity. He understood the explosive force required, and he envisioned a massive cannon, which he called the Columbiad, to provide the initial thrust. While his method of launch, a giant gun, was ultimately impractical for human passengers due to the incredible G-forces, his grasp of the fundamental energy challenge was spot on. His work transcended mere prediction. It served as direct inspiration. Many of the early rocket scientists and pioneers of the space age, including Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Wernher von Braun, cited Verne's novel as a foundational spark for their own interest in space travel. They read his book as young men and wondered, why not? Verne gave the world a believable, almost tangible vision of spaceflight at a time when it was considered the stuff of pure fantasy. He made it feel inevitable. He captured the public's imagination not with magic, but with a compelling blend of drama and scientific plausibility, proving that a well-told story could shape the ambitions of future generations. So when Apollo 8 captured that iconic Earthrise photo over the lunar horizon, or when Neil Armstrong took that first historic step, they weren't just fulfilling President Kennedy's mandate, they were also, in a very real way, bringing the vivid dream of a 19th-century storyteller to glorious life. If Da Vinci gave us the blueprint for flight and Verne charted the course to the moon, then our next prophet provided the very framework for the invisible network that now binds our modern world together. At the turn of the 20th century, an inventor already famous for his revolutionary work with electricity began speaking of an even grander, more audacious idea. Nikola Tesla envisioned a future not just of wireless power, but of wireless information, a global system he believed would connect all of humanity. His predictions, made over a century ago, are so precisely descriptive of our current reality that reading them now is almost unnerving. He spoke of a device small enough to be carried in one's pocket that would allow instant communication across immense distances. He described a system where a businessman in New York could dictate a message, and it would be instantly transcribed in his office in London. He even went so far as to predict the wireless transmission of images, documents, and music, allowing someone to listen to a speech or a symphony performed continents away. In a 1900 issue of Century magazine, he wrote of this future, stating, "It will soon be possible to see the image of a person reflected on a screen thousands of miles away and hear the sound of his voice." He was describing in stunning detail the essence of video calling, the internet, and the smartphone decades before the invention of television and a full century before the first iPhone. But Tesla wasn't merely making wild prognostications, he was actively building the foundation for this world. At his experimental station in Colorado Springs, and later at his partially constructed Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, he was attempting to put his theory into practice. His grand plan was the World Wireless System. He believed the entire planet could be electrified, using the Earth itself and the upper atmosphere as conductive layers to transmit not only electrical power without wires, but also information. He demonstrated the principles of radio transmission years before Marconi's more famous transatlantic signal, and his patents and lectures formed the bedrock of modern radio and wireless technology. The true tragedy is that Tesla's vision was so far ahead of its time that he failed to secure the funding and support to complete his magnum opus, the Wardenclyffe Tower. His financial backers, including J.P. Morgan, grew impatient with his focus on distributing free energy and information for all humanity, rather than on a more immediately profitable venture. The tower was demolished in 1917, and Tesla's grand dream was largely dismissed as the folly of a washed-up genius. Yet, the fundamental principles he was exploring, the resonant frequency of the Earth, the potential of electromagnetic waves for communication, are exactly what enable our Wi-Fi networks, our cellular data, and our global positioning systems today. Every time you send a text message, stream a movie, or video call a friend on the other side of the planet, you are participating in the reality of Tesla's prediction. He didn't just foresee a connected world, he dedicated his life to building the scientific pathway to achieve it, proving that the future often belongs to those who can see the potential in the invisible forces all around us. But sometimes a prediction feels less like inspired foresight and more like a haunting, detailed premonition from the pages of a forgotten book. This brings us to one of the most spine-tingling and inexplicable predictions in history, a story where the line between fiction and fate becomes terrifyingly blurred. 14 years before the RMS Titanic met its tragic end in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, a relatively obscure American author named Morgan Robertson wrote a novella titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. The story was a work of fiction intended as a thrilling sea adventure, but its details would later cast an unnerving shadow over reality. The parallels Robertson described are so numerous and so specific that they defy easy explanation. His fictional ship was named the Titan, and it was lauded as the largest passenger steamship afloat and most famously as being practically unsinkable. Just like the Titanic, the Titan was a triple-screw ocean liner, meaning it was powered by 3 propellers. Robertson gave his ship a length of 800 feet. The Titanic measured 882. The Titan could reach a top speed of 25 knots. The Titanic's was 23. Both vessels were carrying a wealthy, elite passenger list on their maiden voyage across the Atlantic when, on a cold April night, they struck an iceberg on their starboard side. The location of the collision was almost identical, in the North Atlantic, around 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. Perhaps the most devastating and prophetic similarity was the catastrophic lack of lifeboats. Robertson's Titan carried only 24 lifeboats, far too few for its 3,000 passengers and crew. The real Titanic, due to outdated maritime safety regulations that calculated lifeboat capacity based on a ship's gross tonnage rather than its passenger count, carried just 20 boats, enough for only about half of the 2,200 people on board. In both the novel and real life, this insufficient number led to an unimaginable loss of life as the unsinkable ship plunged into the dark ocean depths. The question, of course, is how Robertson could have possibly known. Some argue it was an astonishing case of convergent logic. He was a former sailor who understood the trends in shipbuilding. Builders were competing to construct ever larger and faster luxury liners to cross the Atlantic, and the route they took was the most common and direct path. The danger of icebergs in that corridor was well known to seamen. Robertson simply took all these elements and crafted a worst-case scenario narrative. He took the known facts of his time and extrapolated a disaster waiting to happen. Yet, this logical explanation struggles to account for the sheer volume of minute details that aligned with the Titanic's fate over a decade later. The name, the size, the speed, the month, the cause, the location, the insufficient lifeboats, it feels like more than just an educated guess. It feels like a specific, detailed vision. After the Titanic sank, Robertson's novel was reissued to a stunned public, and he himself was dubbed the man who knew the future. He reportedly claimed that he had been given the information in a series of vivid visions, a compelling if unverifiable story that only adds to the mystery. Whether it was a lucky confluence of maritime knowledge or something far more mysterious, the story of the Titan and the Titanic stands as a powerful, sobering reminder of the fragility of human ambition. It's a cautionary tale about hubris, about the dangers of believing our technology has made us masters of nature. The Titanic was a monument to human ingenuity, a symbol of the boundless optimism of the Gilded Age. Morgan Robertson's story, written years before, serves as its ghostly echo, a fictional warning of a tragedy that the world failed to read in time. After the chilling foreshadowing of the Titanic's demise, our next story shifts from a fictional warning to a deeply personal prophecy, one that demonstrates how a life can be bookended by the cosmos with poetic perfection. The great American author and humorist Mark Twain, a man celebrated for his wit and wisdom, held a lifelong fascination with Halley's Comet. He was born Samuel Langhorne Clemens on November 30, 1835. Just 2 weeks after the comet had made its perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, blazing brightly in the skies over Missouri. This celestial coincidence became a cornerstone of his identity, a fact he often wove into his lectures and conversations with a characteristic mix of pride and playful fatalism. As early as 1906, Twain began making a remarkable declaration to his friends and biographers. He stated with absolute conviction that he had arrived with the comet and that he would not be disappointed if he departed with it. His most famous articulation of this belief came in 1909, a year before the comet's predicted return. He said, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." This wasn't a morbid wish, but a statement of what he perceived as a symmetrical, almost divinely ordained conclusion to his journey. The return of Halley's Comet in April 1910 was a global event, met with a mixture of scientific excitement and public anxiety, as some feared its tail of gases might poison the atmosphere. Twain, by then 74 years old and in declining health, was at his storm cellar home in Redding, Connecticut, having suffered from severe chest pains diagnosed as angina. He passed away from a heart attack on April 21, 1910, just one day after the comet reached its brightest and most spectacular point in the night sky. The precision of his prediction, fulfilled with such breathtaking timing, cemented his legend not just as a literary giant, but as a man who seemed to have a unique understanding of his own destiny. The question of whether this was mere coincidence or something more profound is a fascinating one. On one hand, the statistics are compelling. The lifespan of a human and the 75 to 76-year orbit of a comet are entirely independent cycles. For them to align so perfectly for a single individual is a remarkable astronomical and biological happenstance. Yet, to dismiss it as only chance feels inadequate because it ignores Twain's own agency in the narrative. He didn't just passively experience this coincidence, he actively claimed it, announced it, and wove it into the story of his life. He believed in the connection so fully that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, a narrative thread he helped spin until the very end. This event is the ultimate expression of Twain's complex relationship with fate and determinism, themes he explored deeply in works like A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court and his later, more pessimistic writings. He often grappled with the idea that human lives were not governed by free will, but were instead subject to predetermined forces, much like the unwavering, predictable path of a comet across the heavens. His death, synchronized with the comet's return, feels like the final chapter of a story he himself had written, a perfect blend of cosmic irony and human drama. It stands as one of history's most elegant and personal predictions, a testament to the power of a story so well told that even the universe itself seemed compelled to play its part. While Mark Twain saw his life reflected in the cyclical return of a comet, another writer peered into the heart of matter itself and foresaw a force that would forever alter the course of human history. In 1914, as the world was erupting into its first global war, the visionary British author H.G. Wells published a novel that moved beyond tales of moon landings or shipwrecks to predict something far more profound and terrifying. The book was titled The World Set Free, and within its pages, Wells didn't just imagine a powerful new weapon. He gave it a name, described its mechanics with stunning accuracy, and outlined its catastrophic global consequences, effectively writing the blueprint for the atomic age decades before it began. Wells's prophetic vision centered on what he called atomic bombs. He described them as devices that would utilize the energy locked within atoms themselves, creating not a single momentary blast but a continuous, sustained explosion. He wrote of these bombs falling from the skies, igniting an unstoppable chain reaction of destruction that would lay waste to entire cities and plunge the world into a devastating, protracted war. His descriptions are hauntingly familiar to any student of 20th century history. He spoke of radioactive contamination that would render cities uninhabitable for years, creating zones of death long after the initial explosion, a clear foreshadowing of the persistent nuclear fallout we now understand. For his readers in 1914, this was likely seen as compelling but far-fetched science fiction, the wild speculation of a brilliant mind. Yet, for a handful of scientists just a generation later, it would become a chillingly serious textbook. The most significant impact of Wells's prediction was not on the public, but on the very men who would turn his fiction into reality. A young Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard read The World Set Free in 1932, and the concept seized his imagination. He was so struck by Wells's ideas that he later credited the novel as the direct inspiration for his own groundbreaking work. In 1933, while walking through London, Szilard had a sudden flash of insight, a moment of terrifying clarity where he realized that if an element could be found that would emit more neutrons than it absorbed, it could create a sustained nuclear chain reaction, exactly the process Wells had described in his fiction. This revelation was the essential seed that would eventually grow into the Manhattan Project. Szilard was so convinced of the possibility that he immediately sought to patent the idea of a nuclear chain reaction, and he spent years passionately advocating for research into atomic energy, acutely aware of its potential for both immense power and unimaginable destruction. He understood that Wells's fictional warning was a potential future reality that the world was utterly unprepared for. When he and other European physicists like Enrico Fermi and Eugene Wigner learned that Nazi Germany might be pursuing its own atomic program, it was this fear, crystallized by Wells's novel, that compelled them to write the famous Einstein-Szilard letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. This letter, urging the United States to begin its own atomic research, was the direct catalyst for the creation of the Manhattan Project. In a very real sense, the atomic bomb was born twice, first in the imaginative pages of a novel, and then in the secret laboratories of Los Alamos. What sets Wells's prediction apart from a simple lucky guess was his method. He was a keen student of science, deeply engaged with the latest discoveries of his time. He was writing just years after Ernest Rutherford had first split the atom in 1917, a breakthrough that hinted at the vast energy contained within. Wells took this nascent scientific concept and extrapolated its logical, ultimate application with the narrative force of a master storyteller. He didn't invent the science, but he was perhaps the first to truly grasp its apocalyptic potential and its inevitable appeal to world governments. The World Set Free stands as a monumental example of how science fiction doesn't just predict the future. It can actively shape it by planting ideas in the minds of those with the capability to bring them about. The story of the atomic bomb is therefore not just a tale of physics and politics, but also one of literature and imagination, proving that the pen can indeed be mightier than the sword, even a sword of atomic fire. While H.G. Wells and Jules Verne were conjuring world-altering technologies and epic disasters, a much quieter, more personal form of prophecy was being written for the average American family, predicting the subtle ways technology would weave itself into the very fabric of daily life. In December of 1900, a civil engineer and pioneering railroad statistician named John Elfreth Watkins, Jr., sat down to write an article for the Ladies' Home Journal, one of the most popular magazines of its day. His piece was boldly titled, "What May Happen in the Next 100 Years," and in it he laid out a series of predictions for the world of the year 2000. Unlike the dramatic novels of his contemporaries, Watkins's forecasts were focused on domestic comfort, convenience, and the small miracles that would make everyday existence easier. What's truly astonishing is not that he got some things right, but just how many mundane, specific details of our 21st century world he managed to foresee with pinpoint accuracy. Consider his prediction about how we would capture memories. Watkins wrote that photographs will be telegraphed from any distance. If there be a battle in China 100 years from now, snapshots of its most striking events will be published in the newspapers an hour later. He even added that these photographs will be taken in colors. In an era when photography was a cumbersome process involving heavy glass plates and long exposure times, he perfectly described the essence of digital photography, satellite news feeds, and live color reporting. He predicted the death of distance in news, envisioning a global village where events across the planet could be witnessed almost instantaneously from our own homes. His vision for the home itself was equally prescient. He forecast the rise of ready-made meals, stating that ready-cooked meals will be bought from establishments similar to our bakeries of today. He described meals that will be purchased ready to eat, with the heat applied at the central kitchen, a concept that directly prefigures not just the modern supermarket's frozen food aisle, but also the entire business model of food delivery services and meal kit companies. He also predicted that the fruits and vegetables available in winter would be no different than those in summer, thanks to hotbeds and electric heating, accurately forecasting the global food supply chain and hydroponic farming that allows us to have fresh produce year-round. Watkins also turned his engineer's eye to transportation and communication. He wrote of trains running at 150 miles per hour, a prediction that came true with high-speed rail networks in Europe and Asia. He even envisioned wireless telephone lines that would connect the entire world, allowing a man in New York to hold conversation with a friend in the middle of the China Sea. This is a breathtakingly accurate description of our global mobile phone network and satellite phones. He even predicted that the letters C and X would disappear from the alphabet, a rare miss, though he was perhaps sensing the trend of text messaging abbreviations and emojis that would redefine written communication. Perhaps most charmingly, he turned his predictions to the human body itself. Noting the improvements in nutrition and healthcare, he stated that the average American will be taller in the year 2000. Census data confirms this. The average American man in 1900 was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, while by the year 2000, that average had grown to about 5 feet 9.5 inches. It's a small but powerful detail that showcases his holistic thinking. He understood that progress wouldn't just change our machines, but our very physiology. The brilliance of Watkins's predictions lies in their grounding. He wasn't a science fiction writer dreaming of interplanetary travel. He was an engineer who looked at the technological trends of his day, the telegraph, the railroad, canned food, and extrapolated their logical evolution to their most convenient, efficient endpoint. He focused on the human scale, forecasting a world of comfort and ease that must have seemed like a luxurious fantasy to a reader in 1900. He gave us a map of the 20th century, not drawn in lines of geopolitical power or abstract scientific principle, but in the warm, familiar contours of the home, the dinner table, and the daily newspaper. His article stands as a testament to the idea that the most revolutionary futures are often the ones that make our ordinary lives extraordinary. Moving from the grounded, practical foresight of an engineer to the enigmatic and cryptic verses of a 16th-century apothecary, we encounter a figure whose name is practically synonymous with prophecy itself, Michel de Nostradame, known to the world as Nostradamus. His predictions, written in a collection of rhyming quatrains called Les Prophéties starting in 1555, have been pored over for centuries, with many believers claiming he foresaw everything from the rise of Adolf Hitler to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Yet, one of the most famous and persistently cited examples is his supposed prediction of the Great Fire of London in 1666, a catastrophe that reshaped the city and left an indelible mark on history. The quatrain in question, Century 2, Quatrain 51, is a masterclass in the ambiguous and evocative language that makes Nostradamus so enduringly fascinating. It reads, Le sang du just Londres fera fort, / Bruxelles par fouders de vingt trois les six, / la dame antique chera de place hort, / de mesme sect plusieurs seront oxes. A common English translation renders it as, the blood of the just will be demanded of London, / burnt by fire in 3 times 20 plus 6, / the ancient lady will fall from her high place, / and many of the same sect will be killed. For those seeking a connection to the fire, the clues seem tantalizingly specific. The blood of the just will be demanded of London is interpreted as a grim foreshadowing of the immense suffering and the search for a scapegoat that followed the disaster. The next line, burnt by fire in 3 times 20 plus 6, is where the numbers seemingly align with chilling precision. 3 times 20 is 60, plus 6 equals 66, 1666. The fire itself was an inferno of unimaginable scale, consuming over 13,000 homes, 87 parish churches, and the iconic St. Paul's Cathedral. The phrase, the ancient lady will fall from her high place, is often said to refer to the destruction of the old St. Paul's, a medieval Gothic masterpiece that crumbled in the flames, its lead roof melting and flowing down the streets like a river. The final line, and many of the same sect will be killed, could point to the widespread devastation that did not discriminate, affecting people from all walks of life. The allure of this interpretation is undeniable. It feels like a perfect fit, a puzzle piece snapping into place across a gap of over a century. But this is where we must apply a critical lens to the nature of prophecy and interpretation. Nostradamus did not write clear, journalistic accounts of future events. He wrote in a deliberately obscure style, using a mix of French, Latin, Greek, and Provençal, filled with symbolism, metaphors, and classical allusions. His quatrains are not dated, they are open to an almost infinite number of interpretations. The line 3 times 20 plus 6 is a perfect example. It is not explicitly 1666. It is a mathematical phrase that could be applied to countless other dates, events, or quantities. Critics and historians argue that if you write hundreds of vague, portentous verses about war, famine, fire, and the downfall of leaders, some of them are statistically bound to seem to align with some major historical event through the power of selective thinking and retroactive fitting. Furthermore, the context of Nostradamus' own time is crucial. He lived in an era of immense religious turmoil, plagues, and constant warfare. His "just people demanding blood" could have been a reference to Protestant martyrs persecuted by Catholic monarchs or vice versa. The Ancient Lady could have been a symbol for the Catholic Church or a specific queen. His primary audience would have read his verses through the lens of their own immediate fears and conflicts, not events 100 years in their future. The connection to the Great Fire of London was almost certainly not his intended meaning, but a connection made after the fact by interpreters eager to find proof of his power. This is the true secret to the enduring appeal of Nostradamus. His predictions are not a clear window into the future, but a blank canvas onto which every generation can project its own anxieties and its own history. In times of crisis, people turn to his verses looking for order, for a reason behind the chaos, for proof that even terrible events were part of a larger, knowable plan. The story of the Great Fire of London prediction is less about a man who saw the future and more about our powerful, deeply human desire to find patterns and meaning in the unpredictable tapestry of time, to believe that even the greatest disasters were not random but were, in some way, foretold. While many of the predictions we've explored came from the worlds of literature or engineering, our next example emerges directly from the heart of the scientific revolution itself, showcasing a brilliant mind systematically dreaming of future possibilities. In the 1600s, at the very dawn of modern science, a man named Robert Boyle was helping to lay the foundation for chemistry as we know it. He was a pioneering member of the Royal Society, a group dedicated to the new practice of experimental philosophy, and he is still famous today for Boyle's law, which describes the relationship between the pressure and volume of a gas. But beyond his published work, he kept a private list, a kind of intellectual wish list for the future of humanity that he called his desiderata, or things to be desired. This list, uncovered long after his death, is nothing short of breathtaking. In an age where average life expectancy was perhaps 40 years and medicine was still heavily reliant on leeches and superstition, Boyle wished for the prolongation of life. He dreamed of the recovery of youth, or at least some of the marks of it, as new teeth, new hair. He imagined an art of flying, a way for humans to conquer the skies. He wished for the discovery of a perpetual light, a source of illumination that would never burn out. For a man of his time, these were the fantasies of a particularly imaginative mind. For us, living in the 21st century, this reads less like a wish list and more like a checklist of our greatest technological achievements. Consider his desire for the prolongation of life. In Boyle's era, a simple infection could be a death sentence. Today, thanks to antibiotics, vaccines, advanced surgery, and a deep understanding of human biology, the global average life expectancy has more than doubled. We haven't just prolonged life, we've revolutionized its quality. And on the frontier of science, researchers are actively working on reversing cellular aging, with studies into senolytic drugs that can clear out aging cells and genetic therapies that aim to extend human health span. Boyle's wish is not just fulfilled, we are actively working to exceed it. His hope for the recovery of youth is equally prescient. While we haven't found a literal fountain of youth, modern medicine and cosmetics have made remarkable strides. We have hair transplant surgery and effective treatments for hair loss. We have dental implants that are far superior to new teeth. They are permanent, functional, and indistinguishable from the real thing. Cosmetic procedures can smooth wrinkles and restore a more youthful appearance. Even more profoundly, stem cell research and regenerative medicine hold the promise of actually repairing and rejuvenating aged tissues within the body, moving us from mere appearance toward genuine biological renewal. Then there is the art of flying. When Boyle wrote this, the very idea was the subject of myth and satire. Yet within a few centuries, the Wright brothers would achieve powered flight. Today, we take for granted the miracle of jumbo jets carrying hundreds of people across continents in a matter of hours. Our art of flying has even escaped Earth's atmosphere entirely, with rockets, satellites, and rovers exploring our solar system. We have not only mastered flying, we have used it to become a spacefaring species. Perhaps the most perfectly realized item on his list is the wish for perpetual light. Boyle could only have conceived of this as a magical, unquenchable flame. What we have created is something even more miraculous, the light-emitting diode or LED. An LED bulb can shine continuously for tens of thousands of hours, using a fraction of the energy of the candles and oil lamps of Boyle's time. For all practical purposes in a human lifetime, it is a source of perpetual light. Our cities blaze through the night, and we carry tiny, powerful lights in our pockets everywhere we go, a reality that would have seemed nothing short of alchemical magic to a 17th century scientist. The true significance of Boyle's list isn't just that he guessed right. It's that he represented a new way of thinking. He wasn't a prophet waiting for divine revelation. He was a scientist using his understanding of nature's laws to imagine how they could be harnessed for human betterment. His desiderata was a series of hypotheses about the potential of science itself. He believed that through rigorous inquiry, experimentation, and the application of reason, humanity could transform its own condition. His list is a powerful testament to the optimism of the scientific revolution, a belief that the future is not fixed, but something we can build with our own hands and minds. In dreaming so boldly, Robert Boyle didn't just predict the future, he helped to inspire it, proving that the first step to creating a better world is to dare to imagine it. While Robert Boyle was dreaming of scientific marvels from his laboratory, another kind of visionary was using the power of social fiction to reimagine the very fabric of economics and commerce. In 1888, a largely unknown American author and journalist named Edward Bellamy published a novel that would become a phenomenal bestseller, second only to Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin at the time. The book was titled Looking Backward, 1887, and it told the story of a young Bostonian named Julian West who falls into a hypnotic sleep in 1887 and awakens in the radically transformed world of the year 2000. This utopian society had eradicated poverty, crime, and war through a peaceful, evolved form of socialism. But one of its most strikingly prescient innovations was a simple, elegant system of economic exchange that Bellamy called a credit card. In Bellamy's future Boston, the entire concept of cash has been abolished. There is no physical currency, no coins, no paper bills. Instead, every citizen, upon reaching adulthood, receives an annual credit from the nation's central warehouse, which is essentially the government, based on their equal share of the total productive output of the country. This credit is not a physical thing but an amount assigned to them. To access it for purchases, they are issued a card. Bellamy describes it with remarkable clarity. A credit corresponding to his share of the annual product of the nation is given to every citizen on the public books at the beginning of each year, and a credit card issued him with which he procures at the public storehouses, found in every community, whatever he desires whenever he desires it. He even notes that if a person needs to transfer credit to someone else, they can do so by having the transaction recorded on both of their cards, a process that sounds very much like a modern electronic funds transfer. It is crucial to understand just how radical and foreign this idea was in the late 19th century. The average American in the 1880s lived in a cash-based society. Wages were paid in physical money, purchases were made with coins and notes, and the entire concept of consumer credit was in its infancy, largely limited to informal ledger books at the local general store or exploitative loan sharks. The idea of a national, centralized system of digital credit that eliminated the need to carry any money at all was not just futuristic, it was almost incomprehensible. Bellamy wasn't just predicting a new technology, he was predicting a complete philosophical shift in how society could value labor and distribute goods, removing the friction and inequality he saw inherent in the capitalist system of his day. The novel's impact was immediate and enormous. Looking Backward sold hundreds of thousands of copies and sparked a political movement known as nationalism, with clubs springing up across the country to discuss and promote Bellamy's ideas. While his broader socialist utopia has not come to pass, his specific mechanism for payment proved to be incredibly influential. The term credit card entered the popular lexicon because of his book. Decades later, when financial institutions began to develop the first universal charge cards in the middle of the 20th century, they reached for Bellamy's term to describe this newfangled invention. The first modern credit card, the Diners Club card, launched in 1950, was created for entertainment and travel expenses, but it was the Bank AmeriCard, which eventually became Visa, in 1958 that began to popularize the concept of a revolving line of credit for the general consumer, making Bellamy's vision a commercial reality. What makes Bellamy's prediction so profound is that he correctly foresaw the experience of using this technology, not just its existence. He described a world of effortless, cashless transactions, a reality we now take for granted every time we tap a phone or swipe a piece of plastic. He understood that the future of money was not about creating new forms of physical tender, but about dematerializing it entirely into pure information, a number on a screen, a balance on a card. His prediction stands as a powerful example of how science fiction and social utopianism can act as a testing ground for economic concepts, providing a narrative framework that makes complex ideas tangible and compelling for a mass audience, and in doing so, planting the seeds for their eventual adoption in the real world. From the utopian economics of Edward Bellamy, we now turn to a prediction that feels ripped from today's headlines about climate change and renewable energy, yet it came from one of the most famous inventors of the 19th century. We all know Alexander Graham Bell as the man who gave us the telephone, a revolution in communication that shrank the world. But few remember him as a prescient environmental visionary, a man who looked at the industrial world's voracious appetite for coal and saw an unsustainable path. In a remarkably forward-thinking interview with American Magazine in 1917, Bell turned his formidable intellect toward the future of energy and issued a warning and a prediction that was a full century ahead of its time. Bell began with a stark observation that was radical for an era of seemingly boundless industrial expansion. He stated plainly, "The reserves of coal and oil in the world are limited, and we are drawing upon them much faster than they are being produced." He saw the exhaustible nature of fossil fuels with absolute clarity at a time when most people viewed them as infinite resources, the bedrock of perpetual progress. He calculated that current consumption rates could not be maintained indefinitely, and he warned of the economic and societal upheaval that would follow once these precious resources began to run out. This wasn't just a casual comment, it was a serious, scientifically grounded concern from a man who had spent his life harnessing the laws of physics for practical application. His solution, however, is where his prediction becomes truly astonishing. He declared that the ultimate answer lay not in digging deeper into the ground, but in looking up at the sky. He said, "The enormous energy of the sun's radiation constitutes a source of power that is literally inexhaustible." He went on to passionately argue that the heat of the sun must be harnessed, that humanity's future prosperity depended on learning to capture and utilize solar power. He even speculated about the practical methods, suggesting that solar could be used to heat homes and power factories. Imagine the audacity of this idea in 1917. This was an age before silicon chips, photovoltaic cells, or any real understanding of how to convert sunlight directly into electricity. The solar panel as we know it was still decades from being invented. Bell was essentially predicting a technological revolution based on a principle he knew must be possible, even if the precise mechanics were beyond the science of his day. What makes Bell's foresight so compelling is the context of his own life and work. He was not an environmentalist in the modern sense. He was an inventor and a pragmatist. He was deeply concerned with solving human problems, and he saw the coming energy crisis as the ultimate problem that would need solving. After his work on the telephone, he had turned his attention to aeronautics and, significantly, to experiments in renewable energy. He worked on designs for solar distillation systems to create fresh drinking water from seawater, and he was fascinated by the potential of alternative fuels, even creating a primitive biofuel by fermenting grain waste to produce alcohol. His prediction wasn't a wild guess, it was an extrapolation based on his own hands-on research and a profound belief in human ingenuity. Today, as the world grapples with the urgent crisis of climate change and races to transition away from the very fossil fuels Bell warned us about, his words resonate with an almost prophetic weight. The solar revolution he envisioned is now in full swing, with photovoltaic technology becoming more efficient and affordable every year, powering homes, cities, and entire industries. Scientific organizations like the Alexander Graham Bell Association for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing continue his legacy, but perhaps his greatest legacy is this incredibly early and accurate diagnosis of our planetary predicament. He saw the finish line for fossil fuels and pointed unequivocally toward the sun as our way forward. In doing so, Alexander Graham Bell proved that true genius isn't just about inventing for the present. It's about having the vision to see the needs of the future and daring to imagine the solutions long before the rest of the world even recognizes the problem. If Bellamy and Bell envisioned the abstract systems of our future, our next predictor had a knack for dreaming up the specific gadgets that would fill our homes and pockets, earning him the title often credited as the father of science fiction. A Luxembourgish-American inventor, writer, and publisher named Hugo Gernsback was a man so obsessed with the potential of technology that he launched the first magazine dedicated solely to science fiction, Amazing Stories, in 1926. But more than a decade before that, in 1911, he published a serialized novel that would become a foundational text for the genre, Ralph 124C41+, a title which, when spoken aloud, sounds out the phrase "one to foresee for one." And foresee he did, with an almost bewildering array of inventions that would later become commonplace. The story itself is a classic early sci-fi tale, following its super scientist hero Ralph as he uses his futuristic inventions to rescue a damsel in distress from a Martian villain. While the prose may feel dated to a modern reader, the technological marvels Gernsback described were nothing short of prophetic. His pages are littered with concepts that were pure fantasy in 1911. Television, solar energy, video phones, sound films, space travel, and even something he called televocifors, which are essentially wireless earbuds for listening to music. But one invention stands out for its precision and its direct line to a world-changing technology developed just a few decades later. Gernsback called it the ultraphone. He described the ultraphone as a complex device that combined a television screen, a telephone, and a remarkable function for detecting distant objects. In the story, Ralph uses it to locate a lost airship in a fierce blizzard. Jules wrote that the device could send out a concentrated beam of ultra-rays or polarized ether waves. When these waves struck a distant object like the lost airship, they would be reflected back to the ultraphone. The returning waves would then be converted into an image on a viewing screen, revealing the object's exact location, distance, and even its speed. For readers in 1911, this was a fantastic plot device, a miraculous piece of fictional technology that allowed the hero to save the day. For us, it is a stunningly accurate blueprint for the system that would later be known as radar. The term radar itself is an acronym that wouldn't be coined until 1940 by the US Navy, standing for radio detection and ranging. The basic principle is exactly what Jules outlined: transmitting a focused beam of radio waves and then analyzing the signals that bounce back to determine the range, angle, and velocity of objects. The development of practical radar was a monumental scientific effort, particularly during World War II, where it became a crucial defensive technology for detecting incoming aircraft and ships. It's difficult to overstate its importance. Many historians believe that the use of radar by the British Royal Air Force was a decisive factor in winning the Battle of Britain. So, was Hugo Gernsback the actual inventor of radar? Not in the practical sense. The fundamental physics of radio wave reflection was being explored by other scientists around the same time he was writing his story. But Gernsback's genius was not in laboratory discovery. It was in conceptualization and popularization. He took a complex scientific principle that was only understood by a handful of specialists and transformed it into a tangible, exciting gadget for a mass audience. He gave the idea a name, a visual form, and a practical application in a narrative context, thereby planting the seed of possibility in the minds of an entire generation of readers. Many of the engineers and physicists who worked on the early development of radar in the 1930s and 40s were young boys who grew up reading Gernsback's magazines and stories. They were immersed in a world where such technology was not only possible but expected. This was Hugo Gernsback's true legacy and his method of prediction. He was a master of technological extrapolation. He would look at the cutting-edge inventions of his day, the radio, the telephone, the early cathode ray tube, and imagine their logical, integrated, and amplified future versions. His predictions often came true because he was essentially reverse engineering the future from the components of the present. Ralph 124C41+ is less a novel and more a catalogue of 20th century technological dreams, a testament to the power of science fiction to provide a sandbox for the mind, where the gadgets of tomorrow can be built and tested in the imagination long before they ever appear in a laboratory. Our journey now takes us far beyond inventors and novelists, back to the mist-shrouded peaks of ancient Greece, where prophecy was not a matter of calculated extrapolation, but a divine mystery whispered through the lips of a priestess. Here, at the sacred sanctuary of Delphi, stood the most famous oracle in the ancient world, a place where kings and commoners alike would travel for miles to seek guidance from the god Apollo. And it was here that one of history's most enduring lessons about the perils of misinterpreting a prediction played out between the fabulously wealthy King Croesus of Lydia and the enigmatic Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. Croesus, whose very name became synonymous with immense wealth, was at the height of his power. His kingdom in Asia Minor was a sprawling, prosperous empire, and he was considering a preemptive war against the rising power of Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire. Being a meticulous and pious man, Croesus decided to test all the famous oracles in the known world before committing to such a momentous decision. He sent messengers to 7 oracles with a specific instruction. On the 100th day after their departure, they were to ask the oracle what King Croesus was doing at that very moment. The oracle at Delphi alone passed the test. The Pythia, in a trance, described a scene of incredible specificity. She spoke of a tortoise and a lamb boiling together in a bronze cauldron with a bronze lid. Astonishingly, that is exactly what Croesus was doing. He had devised this bizarre concoction as the ultimate unguessable activity to prove the oracle's power. Convinced of Delphi's authenticity, Croesus then asked his real question: should he march against the Persians? The oracle's response has echoed through the centuries as a masterpiece of ambiguity. She declared that if Croesus attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Overjoyed and hearing only what he wanted to hear, Croesus took this as a clear prophecy of his certain victory. He raised his army, crossed the Halys River into Persian territory, and engaged Cyrus in battle. The fight was indecisive, and Croesus retreated to his capital city of Sardis to regroup for the next spring. But Cyrus, a brilliant military strategist, did not wait. He pursued Croesus, laid siege to Sardis, and captured both the city and the king himself. The great empire that was destroyed was not Persia, but Croesus's own Lydian empire. The prediction had come true in the most devastating way possible. This story is the quintessential example of a self-fulfilling prophecy fueled by hubris. Croesus was so confident in his own power and so certain of a favorable outcome that he failed to consider the dual meaning of the oracle's words. He heard the prediction not as a neutral statement of fact, but as a validation of his own desires. The oracle, in classic Delphic fashion, had spoken a truth that was technically accurate but morally neutral, leaving its interpretation entirely in the hands of the recipient. This was the core of the oracle's power and its danger. The prophecies were never straightforward. They were puzzles designed to test the wisdom of the questioner, to see if they were truly prepared for the consequences of their ambitions. The real tragedy of Croesus is that he had every opportunity to avoid his fate. He was warned. The historian Herodotus tells us that a wise Lydian named Sandonis had counseled him against the war, arguing that if Croesus attacked the Persians, he would find nothing of value in their poor, rugged land to plunder, while they would find everything to covet in his wealthy kingdom. Croesus ignored this practical advice. Later, after his capture, he reportedly sent his chains to Delphi and accused the oracle of deceiving him. The priestess's reply was a chilling lesson in accountability. Apollo had indeed granted the prophecy of a fallen empire, and he had even tried to delay the fall by sending a rainstorm to prevent the burning of Sardis. Croesus, she pointed out, had failed to ask the most crucial follow-up question: which great empire would be destroyed? His failure was not one of faith, but of imagination and humility. The tale of Croesus and the oracle is far more than a simple historical anecdote. It is a timeless archetype. It speaks to the universal human tendency to seek confirmation for our pre-existing beliefs, to interpret ambiguous information in the way that best suits our desires. We see it in modern times when investors ignore warning signs in a booming market, when leaders hear only the intelligence that justifies their military actions, or when we ourselves selectively listen to advice that tells us what we want to hear. The oracle's prediction came true not because it was magically infallible, but because it was a psychological mirror, reflecting back at Croesus his own overconfidence and locking him onto a path of his own choosing. It reminds us that the most dangerous predictions are not those that are wrong, but those that are right in ways we are too proud to understand. Moving from the cautionary whispers of an ancient oracle to the boundless imagination of an 18th century satirist, we find a prediction so precise it seems to defy the very limits of contemporary knowledge. In 1726, the Anglo-Irish writer Jonathan Swift published his masterpiece, Gulliver's Travels, a brilliant and savage satire of human nature, politics, and the follies of his age. Buried within the fantastical voyage to the floating island of Laputa, a society of absurdly absent-minded intellectuals, is a single, throwaway line of such stunning astronomical accuracy that it would baffle scientists for over a century. During a conversation with the Laputan astronomers, Gulliver notes that they have discovered two lesser stars or satellites which revolve about Mars. Swift provides even more jaw-dropping detail. He writes that the inner moon of Mars orbits at a distance of exactly 3 diameters from the center of the planet, while the outer moon orbits at a distance of 5. He even states that the inner moon revolves around Mars in the space of 10 hours and the outer in 21.5. For context, the actual moons, Phobos and Deimos, discovered in 1877 by the American astronomer Asaph Hall, have orbital distances of 1, 4, and 3, 5 Martian diameters, and orbital periods of 7 hours 39 minutes and 30 hours 18 minutes. Respectively, while Swift's numbers aren't photorealistically perfect, their proximity to the truth is nothing short of astounding. How could a writer, best known for his withering wit, possibly have known about 2 tiny, undiscovered moons orbiting a distant planet? The most compelling theory is not one of divine inspiration or psychic ability, but of brilliant literary deduction and a remarkable coincidence. Swift was a keen observer of the scientific debates of his time, and the possibility of Martian moons was actually a topic of speculation among astronomers. Most famously, Johannes Kepler, the father of planetary motion, had once suggested in a letter that since Earth had 1 moon and Jupiter was known to have 4 based on Galileo's observations, then Mars, situated between them, logically ought to have 2. Kepler's reasoning was purely numerical, a search for a pleasing celestial harmony, not based on any observational evidence. It's highly probable that Swift, a man deeply immersed in the intellectual currents of his day, would have been aware of this charming but unproven hypothesis. His genius was in how he used it. Laputa is a satire of the Royal Society and the kind of abstract, impractical science Swift found ridiculous. The Laputans are so lost in their complex calculations and musical theories that they cannot hold a coherent conversation or even dress themselves. By having these comically inept astronomers discover the Martian moons based on pure mathematical conjecture, Swift was likely poking fun at the entire endeavor. He was satirizing the tendency of scientists to get lost in elegant theories that had no basis in observable reality. The joke was that they would claim to find something simply because it fit a neat numerical pattern. The incredible irony, of course, is that the pattern turned out to be real. Over 150 years later, Asaph Hall, armed with the powerful 26-inch refracting telescope at the United States Naval Observatory, went looking for Martian moons. He was on the verge of giving up after several fruitless nights when his wife, Angelina, encouraged him to continue. The very next night, on August 12, 1877, he found Deimos. 6 nights later, he discovered Phobos. The scientific world was electrified, and soon enough, scholars rediscovered Swift's passage. The satirist's joke had become a stunningly accurate prediction. So, was it a lucky guess? In a sense, yes. Swift was not channeling cosmic knowledge. He was crafting a satire using the best available scientific gossip of his era. He took Kepler's numerical musing and ran with it, assigning specific, plausible-sounding numbers to complete the joke. The fact that his fictional numbers landed so close to the real ones is a testament to either his incredible intuition or a series of fortunate coincidences. It remains one of the most delightful and enduring mysteries in the history of literature and science, a moment where satire inadvertently wrote a footnote in the annals of astronomy. It proves that sometimes, even when aiming to mock our attempts to understand the universe, we can accidentally hit the target right in the bullseye. Long before telescopes pierced the heavens or rockets escaped the atmosphere, a Roman statesman and philosopher envisioned the profound emotional impact of seeing our world from the depths of space. In the final section of his monumental work on the Republic, Marcus Tullius Cicero included a philosophical fable known as Somnium Scipionis, or the Dream of Scipio. In this narrative, the Roman general Scipio Aemilianus is visited in a dream by his legendary grandfather, Scipio Africanus, who defeated Hannibal. The elder Scipio takes his grandson on a journey up through the celestial spheres to a point high above the cosmos from which they can look down upon the earth. What Scipio sees from this vantage point is not a triumphant empire or a map of conquests, but a tiny, fragile sphere, isolated in the vast, starry blackness of the void. Cicero's description is breathtakingly accurate, not in its astronomical mechanics, but in its profound psychological insight into what we now call the overview effect. From his divine perspective, Scipio is overwhelmed by the sheer smallness of Earth. He notes that the mighty Roman Empire, the source of so much pride and conflict, appears as nothing more than a few tiny specks on its surface. The vast oceans that seemed impassable barriers are reduced to mere ribbons of water, and the great continents he knew are just small patches of land. This realization shatters his earthly perspective, filling him with a sense of awe and a humbling understanding of humanity's true place in the cosmos. This is the very core of the overview effect, a term coined in the 1980s by author Frank White to describe the cognitive shift in awareness reported by astronauts when they view Earth from space, a profound sense of connection to all humanity, and a piercing awareness of the planet's fragility and unity. Cicero, writing in the 1st century before the Common Era, had somehow predicted this transformative experience with stunning emotional precision. Beyond the visual description, Cicero's vision included an auditory element that was just as revolutionary. As Scipio ascends through the celestial spheres, he is enveloped by a magnificent, harmonious sound, a music generated by the motion of the planets and stars themselves. This was the musica universalis, or the music of the spheres, a philosophical concept that the universe operates according to mathematical ratios and movements that produce a kind of cosmic harmony inaudible to human ears. While we now understand that space is a vacuum and does not transmit sound in this way, the metaphorical power of Cicero's idea is undeniable. Astronauts who have journeyed to space consistently report a similar, almost spiritual sensation of profound peace, interconnectedness, and awe, a silent, internal music of the soul sparked by the sublime sight of our planet hanging in the blackness. Cicero's music of the spheres was his way of articulating this ineffable feeling of cosmic wonder. The most compelling question is how a Roman philosopher, with no scientific understanding of orbital mechanics or the true scale of the universe, could have conceived of an experience so specific to space travel. Cicero was not a scientist. He was a student of Greek philosophy, deeply influenced by Platonic and Pythagorean ideas. The concept of a spherical Earth was known to the learned elite of his time, and the idea of ascending to a higher plane for wisdom was a common philosophical trope. Cicero's genius was in synthesizing these abstract ideas into a powerful, empathetic narrative. He used the tool of a dream vision to bypass the limits of contemporary science and tap directly into a universal human longing to see our home from the outside, to gain the ultimate objective perspective. He was engaging in a thought experiment of staggering ambition, using the power of his imagination to project himself and his reader to a point of view that technology would not allow for another 2,000 years. The enduring legacy of the dream of Scipio is its timeless message. Cicero wasn't just predicting a future technological achievement, he was prescribing a philosophical antidote to human pettiness. The lesson for Scipio and for the reader is that from this cosmic perspective, earthly fame, wealth, and territorial disputes are revealed as utterly meaningless. What truly matters, the vision argues, is virtuous action conducted for the benefit of the whole, the res publica, or public good. This aligns perfectly with the reports of astronauts who often return to Earth with a renewed commitment to environmentalism and global cooperation, having seen firsthand that borders are human inventions invisible from space. Cicero's prediction, therefore, was not merely an accidental foreshadowing of a physical view. It was an intentional, profound prediction of the philosophical and psychological transformation that such a view would inevitably bring. He understood that to see the Earth as a whole would be to understand our profound responsibility to it and to each other, a lesson beamed back to us through the ages from the mind of a Roman dreamer. While Cicero dreamt of cosmic perspectives and overview effects, a French novelist was crafting a much more intimate vision of the future, one that would shrink the world not by leaving it, but by connecting every corner of it instantly. In 1846, a full century before the first experimental video calls and 170 years before Zoom meetings became a daily routine, a writer named Émile Souvestre published a remarkable work of speculative fiction titled Le Monde tel qu'il sera, or The World as It Will Be. This satirical novel followed a young couple, Marthe and Maurice, who had taken on a tour of the world of the year 3000 by a demon named John Prosper. Souvestre's future was a dystopian capitalist nightmare, a chilling critique of the industrial age's trajectory, but nestled within its grim predictions was a piece of technology so prescient it feels ripped from a 21st century tech brochure. He called it the téléphone. Souvestre didn't just mention this device in passing, he described it with a journalist's eye for functional detail. In his future, every wealthy home was equipped with a téléphone. It consisted of a large plate of glass connected by electrical wires to a similar device in another location. When a call was placed, the glass plate would become a window into the other room, displaying a live, moving image of the person on the other end, allowing for a face-to-face conversation across any distance. He described businessmen using it to conduct meetings without leaving their offices, and families using it to check in on distant relatives. For a reader in 1846, a year when the electric telegraph itself was still a dazzling novelty sending clicks and dashes over wires, the idea of transmitting a full, live image must have seemed like the purest magic. Souvestre was essentially predicting the core experience of FaceTime, Skype, and Zoom with an almost eerie accuracy. The true brilliance of his prediction lies in its integration. Souvestre didn't imagine the téléphone as a standalone miracle. He accurately foresaw its social and economic context. He predicted it would become a standard appliance in homes and a crucial tool for commerce, fundamentally altering how people work and interact. He understood that the value of such a technology wasn't just in the novelty of seeing someone, but in the time and resources it would save, eliminating the need for arduous travel for simple conversations. This reflects the very arguments used today to promote video conferencing: increased productivity, reduced travel costs, and the maintenance of personal connection across global distances. He even touched on a modern dilemma by portraying it as a technology primarily for the affluent, hinting at the digital divide between those who have access to the latest tools and those who do not. How did a mid-19th century writer conjure such a specific vision? Souvestre was operating at a fascinating crossroads of scientific discovery and literary imagination. The foundational principles were being laid in his own time. Scientists like Alexander Bain were experimenting with chemical-based fax machines that could transmit still images over telegraph wires. The concept of electric vision was a topic of speculation in scientific circles. Souvestre, a sharp social critic, took these nascent ideas and extrapolated their logical conclusion within the framework of his satirical world. He looked at the telegraph, which could send a message, and asked the next obvious question: what if it could send a person's presence? His prediction was a product of logical progression, a narrative leap based on the technological trends he observed around him. Yet there is a layer of poignant tragedy to Souvestre's story. Unlike Verne or Wells, who lived to see some of their predictions begin to take shape, Souvestre died in 1854, long before the first blurry images were ever transmitted electronically. He never knew that his téléphone would inspire real-world inventors. The term itself was adopted by early pioneers like Konstantin Senlek and George R. Carey, who sketched out theoretical designs for telectroscopes based on the concept, while the mechanical telephote they imagined, using arrays of selenium cells and light bulbs, was not the path that eventually led to the cathode ray tube and modern digital imaging. The conceptual seed had been planted by a novelist. Emile Sylvester's greatest legacy is a powerful reminder that science fiction is not merely about predicting gadgets. It is about anticipating human needs and desires. He saw a world growing more interconnected and busy, and he imagined a tool that would preserve our humanity within that hustle, allowing us to see the smile on a loved one's face even from miles away. In that sense, his telephote was more than a prediction. It was a prescription for maintaining connection in a rapidly accelerating world, a vision we now hold in the palms of our hands. As the Spanish Empire reached its zenith in the late 16th century, a sense of divine confidence permeated its court and its military. King Philip II, ruler of the most powerful nation on earth, saw himself as the sword of the Catholic Church, destined to crush heresy and expand his dominion. His most ambitious project was the assembling of a colossal naval force, an armada of 130 ships carrying over 30,000 men, intended to invade Protestant England, depose Queen Elizabeth I, and restore Catholic rule. This fleet was so formidable, so vast in its scope and firepower, that it was proudly christened La Armada Invincible, the Invincible Armada. But even as the galleons were being readied in the port of Lisbon, a story began to circulate, a whispered tale of a prophecy that cast a shadow over the entire enterprise. It was said that a humble, devout monk from the Order of St. Francis had requested an audience with the king. According to the accounts that have filtered down through history, this monk, whose name is lost to time, was granted his audience. He stood before the most powerful monarch in Christendom and delivered a warning that was as bold as it was terrifying. He reportedly told Philip that he had received a vision from God concerning the Great Armada. He prophesied that the fleet would not achieve its glorious aim. Instead, it would meet with a catastrophic defeat. The heart of his prophecy was a condemnation not of Spanish strength but of Spanish pride. He warned that the very hubris encapsulated in the fleet's arrogant name, the Invincible Armada, would be its undoing. He implored the king to reconsider his path, to avoid provoking the wrath of God through such overwhelming vanity. To a ruler who believed his every move was blessed by divine providence, this must have sounded like sheer blasphemy. The king, utterly convinced of his imminent victory and his righteous cause, reportedly dismissed the monk and his dire prediction outright. The warning was ignored, and the wheels of war continued to turn. In the summer of 1588, the Great Fleet set sail under the command of the Duke of Medina Sidonia. The plan was to sail up the English Channel, link up with the Duke of Parma's army waiting in the Spanish Netherlands, and launch a coordinated invasion of England. Initially, the prediction seemed foolish. The Spanish fleet was a breathtaking sight, a floating city of wood and cannon. But the English, led by cunning commanders like Sir Francis Drake and Lord Howard of Effingham, refused to engage in the traditional close-quarter boarding actions where the Spanish excelled. Instead, they used their smaller, faster, and more maneuverable ships to harry the Spanish formation from a distance, their longer-range guns inflicting damage without ever coming within reach of the Spanish muskets and swords. This was a new kind of naval warfare, and it constantly frustrated the Spanish juggernaut. Then came the pivotal moment that transformed a tactical nuisance into a legendary disaster. After an indecisive series of skirmishes in the Channel, the Spanish admiral made the fateful decision to drop anchor off the coast of Calais to regroup and wait for Parma's forces. The English saw their opportunity. On the night of July 28th, they launched 8 fire ships, old vessels packed with pitch, tar, and gunpowder, set ablaze and sent drifting with the wind and tied directly into the tightly packed Spanish fleet. Panic erupted. The Spanish captains, fearing these floating bombs, cut their anchor cables to escape, scattering their impeccably organized crescent formation into chaos. The following day, at the Battle of Gravelines, the now disorganized Spanish ships were easy prey for the English navy, which inflicted heavy damage. The final, decisive blow, however, was not delivered by English cannons but by the North Atlantic weather. The damaged Spanish fleet, its cohesion shattered, could not sail back through the English Channel against the prevailing southwesterly winds. The only route home was the long, treacherous journey north around Scotland and Ireland, straight into a series of brutal and unseasonable storms. The ships, already battered from battle and now missing their anchors to ride out the gales, were dashed against the rocky coasts. Thousands of Spanish sailors and soldiers, the pride of Philip's empire, drowned or were killed by English forces upon making landfall. Of the 130 ships that had set out with such confidence, fewer than half managed to straggle back to Spain. The invincible armada had been utterly destroyed, not by a superior fleet alone, but by a combination of innovative tactics, poor decisions, and most famously the fierce, unforgiving weather that the English would later call the Protestant wind. The monk's prophecy had come to pass with devastating accuracy. The pride of Spain, its belief in its own invincibility, had indeed been its downfall. The story of the prophecy spread like wildfire across Europe, becoming a powerful moral and historical lesson. It was seized upon by England as proof of God's favor for their cause, and by Spain's enemies as a classic tale of hubris meeting its inevitable nemesis. The event marked the beginning of the decline of Spanish naval supremacy and the rise of England as a global maritime power. The monk's warning transcends its specific historical moment to become a universal archetype, a timeless reminder that no amount of power, wealth, or perceived divine favor can shield a nation from the consequences of its own arrogance. It stands as one of history's most poignant examples of a prediction that was not just about forecasting an event, but about diagnosing a fatal flaw in the human spirit, a flaw that has doomed ambitious ventures long before 1588 and continues to echo in the halls of power to this day. While the Spanish monk warned of hubris and the oracle of Delphi traded in ambiguous verse, our next visionary offered a radically different kind of prediction, a detailed, hopeful blueprint for humanity's intellectual liberation. In 1627, the same year that the Pilgrims were founding Plymouth Colony in the New World, a different kind of founding document was published in England, one that would lay the intellectual groundwork for the entire modern world. Its author was Sir Francis Bacon, a philosopher, scientist, and statesman who served as Lord Chancellor under King James I. The book was a utopian novel titled New Atlantis, and though it was left unfinished at his death, its central idea was so powerful and precise that it would eventually reshape the globe. Bacon didn't predict a specific invention or disaster. He predicted the very system we use to invent things, the organized, collaborative pursuit of knowledge itself. At the heart of his fictional island nation of Bensalem is an institution called Salomon's House, also known as the College of the 6 Days' Works. Bacon describes it not as a monastery for solitary thinkers or a royal court for alchemists, but as a state-sponsored, highly organized community of researchers dedicated to a single goal: the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. This was a revolutionary concept. In Bacon's time, what we call science was a scattered pursuit practiced by isolated gentlemen scholars, university dons teaching ancient texts, or alchemists working in secret for wealthy patrons. Bacon envisioned something entirely new, a collective, methodical, and well-funded enterprise where teams of specialists worked together in a division of labor to systematically investigate nature for the explicit purpose of improving human welfare. The structure and functions of Salomon's House are described with an administrative clarity that reads like a modern grant proposal. Bacon outlines specific roles for its members, which he calls fellows. There are the merchants of light who travel the world to gather knowledge and books from other cultures. The depredators collect the experiments of all the mechanical arts. The mystery men study these collected experiments to uncover new techniques. The pioneers or miners then try out new experiments based on these findings. This division of labor extends further to compilers, dowry men, lamps, inoculators, and finally, the interpreters of nature, who rise to the top to synthesize all this data into overarching theories and axioms. This is a stunningly accurate prediction of the collaborative, specialized, and hierarchical nature of a modern research university department or a corporate R&D lab. But Bacon went beyond just personnel. He dreamed up the very facilities that would make this research possible. He described vast caverns dug into mountains for geological studies and refrigeration experiments. He wrote of high towers for meteorological observations and astronomy. He envisioned massive lakes of both salt and fresh water for the study of marine life, and what he called perspective houses for experimenting with light and vision, a clear precursor to advanced optics labs. He even described facilities for simulating weather, breeding new species of animals and plants, and creating new medicines in what we would now call pharmaceutical laboratories and genetic engineering facilities. He was essentially blueprints for the entire infrastructure of modern experimental science, from particle accelerators like CERN to biosphere research stations. The profound impact of this vision cannot be overstated. When Bacon wrote New Atlantis, the scientific method as we know it was in its infancy. He himself was one of its chief architects, advocating for a move away from Aristotelian deduction and toward empirical, inductive reasoning based on observation and experimentation. Salomon's House was the institutional embodiment of this new philosophy. It served as the direct inspiration for the founding of the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge in 1660, often considered the world's first national scientific institution. Its founding members, including Robert Boyle and Robert Hooke, explicitly cited Bacon as their guiding spirit and New Atlantis as their model. This lineage extends directly to every major scientific institution that followed. The great research universities like MIT and Stanford, national bodies like the National Science Foundation in the United States and the Max Planck Society in Germany, and global think tanks like the Rand Corporation. Francis Bacon's prediction was ultimately a prediction about the power of human cooperation. He foresaw that the great challenges of the future would not be solved by lone geniuses in garrets, but by communities of experts sharing data, challenging each other's findings, and building upon a common foundation of knowledge. He predicted that for science to truly flourish, it required not just brilliant minds, but a supportive structure, funding, facilities, and a shared mission. Every time a team of researchers publishes a peer-reviewed paper, every time a government funds a study on climate change or a new cancer treatment, and every time a breakthrough emerges from a collaborative lab, they are fulfilling the prophecy of Salomon's House. Bacon didn't just imagine a future device, he imagined the entire engine of progress that would create all future devices, gifting us the blueprint for the world we now take for granted. While Francis Bacon provided a blueprint for the very institutions that would build our future, our next visionary didn't just predict a new technology. He gave it a name, a texture, and a dark, alluring soul, effectively writing the mythology for a world that did not yet exist. In 1984, the same year Apple launched the Macintosh with its revolutionary graphical user interface, a largely unknown American-Canadian author named William Gibson published his debut novel, Neuromancer. The book, which would become the foundational text of the cyberpunk genre, didn't just foresee the internet, it conjured an entire digital reality into being, a realm he called cyberspace. Gibson's description of this space is now legendary, a piece of writing that has seared itself into the collective consciousness of the tech world. He wrote of a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions, a graphic representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system. His protagonist, Case, a burned-out console cowboy, doesn't merely type commands. He jacks directly into this matrix where he navigates vast, neon-lit architectures of information that have the clarity of ice. He describes fields of data arranged in the non-space of the mind like city lights, receding into an infinite distance. For readers in 1984, this was a dizzying, almost incomprehensible concept. Personal computers were still a novelty for most, and the nascent internet, then a text-based network used primarily by academics and the military, was a far cry from the immersive, visual, and visceral landscape Gibson described. He wasn't predicting a better version of what already existed. He was dreaming up an entirely new dimension of human experience. What sets Gibson's prediction apart is its profound cultural and aesthetic accuracy. He didn't just get the technical bits right, he predicted the feel of the digital age, its inherent tensions and social consequences. Neuromancer is populated with AI entities vying for liberation, powerful multinational corporations that operate above the law, and a global underclass of hackers and street samurai. He envisioned a world where the line between the human and the machine is irrevocably blurred through cybernetic enhancements, brain-computer interfaces, and synthetic personalities. The novel's central heist revolves around freeing an artificial intelligence, Wintermute, from its programmed constraints, a plot that feels less like science fiction and more like a philosophical debate we are having today about AGI, alignment and consciousness. He saw that our technology wouldn't just change what we do, it would change who we are, creating new forms of identity, new types of crime, and new concentrations of power. The most astonishing impact of Gibson's work was not on readers, but on the pioneers who were actively building the future he had described. For an entire generation of computer scientists, software engineers, and entrepreneurs, Neuromancer was less a novel and more a field guide, a source of inspiration, and even a design document. The term cyberspace entered the lexicon of the tech industry almost immediately, providing a powerful and evocative name for the intangible network they were constructing. When Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1989, he was creating a system for sharing information. But when developers like those at Silicon Graphics or later, at companies like Google and Meta, began thinking about how to represent and navigate that information, they often reached for the aesthetic and conceptual framework Gibson had provided. The idea of navigating data as a visual, spatial environment directly influenced the development of virtual reality, graphical user interfaces, and even the concept of the metaverse. Gibson himself has often stated that he wasn't a prophet, but a novelist collaging the semiotic ghosts of the present. He wrote Neuromancer on a manual typewriter, and his knowledge of computers was practically non-existent. He based his descriptions on video arcades, the nascent hacker culture he saw in films, and the overwhelming sensory overload of Japanese cities. This is the true magic of his prediction. He wasn't extrapolating from circuit diagrams, he was observing the cultural and human trends that surrounded the technology. The desire for escape, the fear of corporate control, the allure of transcending the body. He understood that technology is never neutral, it is always embedded in a social context of power, desire, and economics. By writing a compelling story about that context, he didn't just predict the internet. He gave us the narrative tools to understand it, to critique it, and to imagine where it might take us next. Every time we put on a VR headset, every time we worry about data privacy, and every time we marvel at a new AI, we are living inside the world that William Gibson dreamed into existence, a testament to the power of story to shape the reality it seeks only to describe. For two nations separated by just 21 miles of water, the idea of a fixed link has been a tantalizing dream for centuries, a symbol of connection that seemed perpetually at odds with the deep-seated rivalry and isolationist instincts that have defined English and French history. The sheer logistical and political audacity of such a project made it the stuff of fantasy for generations, a prediction that felt more like a folk tale than a future public works project. Yet the drive to conquer that narrow strip of sea, the English Channel, persisted with a remarkable tenacity, fueled by visionaries who refused to accept that a stretch of water should forever divide two of Europe's greatest powers. The story of this prediction begins not in the age of steam and steel, but in the early days of the Napoleonic Wars. In 1802, as Napoleon Bonaparte was massing his armies for a potential invasion of Britain, a French engineer named Albert Mathieu Favier approached the first consul with a breathtakingly bold proposal. His plan was for a tunnel not for trains but for horse-drawn carriages, illuminated by oil lamps and vented by giant chimneys that would rise above the waves to the surface of the channel. Perhaps the most whimsical detail of his design was a proposed artificial island mid-channel, which would serve as a resting point for horses and a customs station. While Napoleon was reportedly intrigued by the concept, the resumption of war with Britain quickly shelved any serious discussion. Matthew's plan was fantastical, but it was profoundly significant. It was the first serious engineering proposal to physically link the two nations, transforming the idea from a mere dream into a subject of legitimate, if premature, technical debate. The dream lay dormant until a more peaceful and technologically advanced era revived it with renewed vigor. The 1880s saw the most serious and heartbreaking near realization of the prediction. This was the golden age of railway expansion, and both British and French companies, armed with new tunneling technology like the mechanical boring machine, saw the channel not as a barrier but as the ultimate engineering challenge. A formal project was launched, led by the newly formed Channel Tunnel Company. Work actually began in 1882, with pilot tunnels being bored from both coasts. The British side, using a colossal boring machine designed by Colonel Frederick Beaumont, managed to dig over a mile out under the seabed from Shakespeare Cliff near Dover. Simultaneously, the French advanced nearly a mile from Sangatte. The public was captivated. The prediction seemed on the very cusp of coming true. But then, as so often in Anglo-French relations, politics and fear intervened. The British military establishment, particularly the Army and the Royal Navy, raised a furious alarm. They argued that a fixed link was not a gateway for commerce but a potential invasion route, an undersea dagger pointed at the heart of British security. The historical memory of Napoleon's invasion plans was still potent, and the paranoia proved decisive. In 1883, the British Prime Minister, William Gladstone, was persuaded, and the government abruptly withdrew its support, ordering all work to cease. The nearly 2 miles of tunnel were abandoned and eventually sealed, a ghost of a future that wasn't to be, a prediction deferred for over a century. The machines fell silent, and the sea remained once again an unbreachable moat. It would take the profound geopolitical shift following World War II and the formation of the European Economic Community to finally create the political will to overcome centuries of suspicion. The project was formally agreed upon by the British and French governments in 1964, though it would take another 22 years of stops, starts, and complex negotiations before the massive tunnel boring machines, or TBM, once again began their slow, grinding march beneath the channel floor. The engineering challenges were monumental, involving the precise meeting of 2 tunnels drilled from opposite ends, the management of water pressure from the permeable chalk marl above, and the creation of a sophisticated safety system within a 31-mile-long tube, 23 of those miles underwater. When the Channel Tunnel, or Channel, finally opened in May of 1994, it was the triumphant fulfillment of a prediction nearly 200 years in the making. It wasn't just the realization of Albert Matthew's horse-drawn carriage vision or the completion of the Victorian engineers' interrupted work. It was a symbol of a new Europe, one where old enmities were being buried quite literally under the sea. The tunnel stands as a testament to the power of a persistent idea, a prediction that refused to die despite war, political fear, and unimaginable engineering hurdles. It proves that some of the most enduring predictions are not about sudden inventions, but about the slow, stubborn triumph of connection over isolation, and the unwavering human belief that no divide, not even a legendary body of water, is truly permanent. While William Gibson was mapping the digital frontier of cyberspace, another writer was looking even farther out, not into a consensual hallucination, but into the very fabric of space itself, to propose a concept so perfectly reasoned that it would become a permanent feature of our orbital landscape. In October of 1945, as the world was still grappling with the aftermath of a global war, a young British officer and budding science fiction author named Arthur C. Clarke submitted a technical article to the journal Wireless World. Its title was modest: "Extraterrestrial Relays: Can Rocket Stations Give Worldwide Radio Coverage?" But its contents were nothing short of revolutionary, offering a detailed blueprint for a technology that would utterly transform human civilization: the communication satellite. Clarke's genius was in his synthesis. He took two well-established concepts: the rocket, which had just been proven as a weapon of terrifying power in the V2, and the geostationary orbit, a theoretical orbital path first proposed by the Russian theorist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, and combined them into a practical, world-changing application. He calculated that if you placed a satellite at an altitude of 22,236 miles directly above the equator, it would orbit the Earth at exactly the same rate as the planet rotates. From the perspective of anyone on the ground, this satellite would appear to hang motionless in the sky, a fixed point in the heavens. Clarke realized that just 3 of these strategically placed artificial moons could provide complete radio coverage for the entire planet, their signals blanketing the Earth except for the most remote polar regions. What's most astonishing about his paper is not the boldness of the idea, but the meticulous, almost casual accuracy with which he described the system we use today. He detailed the technology these stations would need, including the microwave radio relays and the solar power to run them. He even discussed the potential for television broadcasting and the challenges of station keeping to hold the satellite in its precise orbital slot. For the engineers reading Wireless World in 1945, this was a staggering leap. The V2 rocket could barely reach the edge of space, and the first man-made object wouldn't even achieve Earth orbit for another 13 years. Clarke was describing a future that required lifting a payload thousands of miles higher than anyone had even dreamed of attempting. The world, however, was not immediately ready to fund such a grandiose scheme. Clarke's idea was largely seen as an interesting but fanciful piece of speculation from a science fiction writer. The term science fiction writer is key here because Clarke always existed in that beautiful nexus between rigorous science and boundless imagination. He wasn't just making a wild guess, he was applying the laws of physics as he knew them to their logical, ultimate conclusion. He patented the concept in 1947, though he later admitted he likely wouldn't have been able to enforce it as the fundamental orbital mechanics were pre-existing knowledge. His true reward was not financial but immortal. When SYNCOM-3, the first truly geostationary communications satellite, was launched by NASA in 1964 to broadcast the Tokyo Olympics to the United States, it was fulfilling Clarke's prophecy with pinpoint accuracy. The era of instantaneous global communication had begun, and it was all built upon the orbital path he had so clearly defined. In a fitting tribute, the geostationary orbit itself is now often referred to as the Clarke orbit or the Clarke belt within the aerospace community, a rare honor that places his name alongside those of great astronomers like Kepler and Hubble. The legacy of this single paper is almost immeasurable. Every time you watch a live news feed from the other side of the world, check the forecast from a satellite weather map, use the turn-by-turn guidance of a GPS system that relies on a constellation of satellites, or simply change the channel on your satellite television, you are utilizing a technology that was first described in detail by a 27-year-old visionary. Arthur C. Clarke's prediction stands as a towering example of the power of thought experiments, proving that with a firm grasp of physics and a courageous imagination, you can quite literally map the future, drawing the plans for tomorrow's world on the blueprint of the possible. Yet even as the world marveled at the technological foresight of a Clarke or a Gibson, a far older and more ominous form of prediction was weaving its way through the heart of American political life, one born not of calculation but of conflict and a profound sense of loss. This is the story of the Curse of Tippecanoe, also known as Tecumseh's Curse, a 20-year pattern of presidential death that seemed to defy all odds and logic, creating a legend of vengeance that would haunt the White House for over a century. The tale begins not in the halls of power, but on the banks of the Tippecanoe River in Indiana Territory in November of 1811. The conflict was a culmination of rising tensions between a powerful Native American confederacy, led by the brilliant Shawnee leader Tecumseh, and the expanding United States, represented by the territorial governor William Henry Harrison. Tecumseh had traveled south to recruit more tribes to his cause, leaving his brother, Tenskwatawa, a charismatic spiritual leader known as the Prophet, in charge. Against Tecumseh's explicit orders to avoid confrontation, Tenskwatawa allowed himself to be goaded by Harrison's advancing forces. Assuring his warriors that his magic would protect them from the white man's bullets, he launched a pre-dawn attack on Harrison's camp. The Battle of Tippecanoe was a brutal and bloody affair, and despite heavy casualties on both sides, Harrison's forces ultimately held their ground and routed the Confederacy's warriors. In the aftermath, Harrison's men burned Prophetstown, the Confederacy's sacred settlement, to the ground, destroying its food supplies for the coming winter and shattering Tenskwatawa's credibility. It is from this bitter defeat that the legend of the curse emerges. While no contemporary written record from Tecumseh or Tenskwatawa exists, the oral tradition, as recounted by native sources and later settlers, holds that the enraged Shawnee leader pronounced a curse upon Harrison and the great white fathers who would follow him. The specifics vary, but the most enduring version claims he vowed that Harrison would become president, but that he would not finish his term, and that every great chief chosen every 20 years thereafter would also die in office. This was not a random threat. It was a potent invocation of justice, a promise that the leaders who oversaw the dispossession of native peoples would themselves be struck down, their power rendered meaningless by fate. The curse's power lay in its terrifying, seemingly perfect accuracy. William Henry Harrison, the first target, was indeed elected in 1840, a year ending in 0. His inauguration day was bitterly cold, yet he delivered an address of nearly 2 hours without a coat or hat. He fell ill with a severe cold that rapidly developed into pneumonia, and he died just 31 days into his presidency, becoming the first U.S. president to die in office. The pattern had been set. Abraham Lincoln, elected in 1860, was assassinated in 1865. James A. Garfield, elected in 1880, was shot by a disgruntled office seeker in 1881 and died after a prolonged struggle. William McKinley, elected to his second term in 1900, was assassinated in 1901. Warren G. Harding, elected in 1920, died of a probable heart attack in 1923 amidst swirling scandals. Franklin D. Roosevelt, elected for his third term in 1940, died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1945. And finally, John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960, was assassinated in 1963. For 120 years, the curse held an unbroken grip on the American psyche. 7 presidents elected in 0-year cycles had all died in office. It was a statistical anomaly so bizarre that it fueled endless speculation in newspapers, magazines, and later television specials. The curse became a staple of American folklore, a ghost story told about the highest office in the land, a seemingly supernatural force that transcended politics. It was a narrative that offered a dark, poetic symmetry to history, a way to make sense of the random, brutal tragedies that had befallen the nation's leaders. Yet, like all compelling legends, the curse begins to unravel under closer scrutiny. The first crack appeared with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. Early in his presidency, on March 30, 1981, John Hinckley Jr.'s assassination attempt left Reagan gravely wounded by a bullet that ricocheted off his limousine and lodged inches from his heart. For a moment, it seemed the curse had struck again, but Reagan survived thanks to advanced medical care and his own remarkable physical resilience. He went on to serve 2 full terms, definitively breaking the cycle. The pattern was broken again when George W. Bush, elected in 2000, also survived his 8 years in office despite threats and even a shoe thrown at him during a press conference. So, was it ever a real curse or just a chilling coincidence? Historians largely lean toward the latter, pointing to the lack of concrete contemporary evidence directly linking Tecumseh to the specific prophecy. The curse narrative as we know it was popularized and codified decades after the fact, finding its way into print in the late 1800s, long after most of the principles were dead. Furthermore, the 0-year pattern is a convenient but arbitrary construct. If one includes presidents who were elected in other years but also died in office, like Zachary Taylor or James Polk, the pattern loses its neat 20-year symmetry. The curse is a powerful example of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data. In a nation still young and forging its identity, the curse provided a dramatic, mythic framework for understanding profound national trauma, transforming a series of unrelated tragedies into a single, epic story of a promise made on a bloody battlefield, a debt that took over a century to settle. Yet as the curse's pattern was finally broken by the resolve of a modern president, another kind of prophecy was being written, one that foretold not the death of leaders, but the slow atrophy of the human spirit in a world of limitless connection. In 1909, the same year John Elfreth Watkins was predicting televised news and ready-made meals, the celebrated English novelist E. M. Forster, known for his penetrating human dramas like A Room with a View, ventured into entirely new territory. He published a short work of science fiction titled The Machine Stops, a story so chillingly precise in its depiction of our digital age that reading it today feels less like encountering a vintage curiosity and more like reading a piercing critique written just yesterday. Forster's future humanity lives not on the surface of the Earth, but in a vast subterranean hive of identical individual cells. Each person lives in complete isolation, their every physical need provided for by a global, godlike entity known simply as the machine. They never leave their rooms. Their entire world, their entire existence is mediated through a glowing round plate, a communication device that allows for instant face-to-face conversation with anyone else on the planet. Through this device, they attend lectures, share ideas, and maintain their social connections. This is not a luxury, it is the entirety of their culture. They are, in effect, the world's first remote workers, the first digital citizens, living a life of pure virtual interaction generations before the internet was even a concept. The parallels to our social media ecosystem are so direct they are almost unsettling. The inhabitants of this world do not create, they curate and reshare. They deliver short, derivative lectures to each other, gaining ideas second-hand. They pursue faddish topics with manic intensity before quickly abandoning them for the next trend. Their conversations are a whirlwind of superficiality, a performance of wit and worldliness that masks a profound emptiness. The protagonist, Vashti, is a respected lecturer who embodies this vapid culture. She is horrified by the primitive, physical world and worships the machine with a religious fervor. Her son, Kuno, is the heretic. He yearns for something real, for direct experience. He tells her of his illegal journey to the planet's surface, where he felt the wind on his face and saw the dim outlines of the forgotten stars. He tries to make her understand that humanity has traded reality for a comfortable, sanitized, and utterly meaningless simulation. "You are beginning to worship the machine," he warns her. "You think it irreligious of me to have found a way out of my cell. That is why it is so easy to rescue you. You are losing the power of thought." This is the core of Forster's astonishing prediction. He foresaw not just the technology of remote communication, but its psychological and social consequences. He predicted the echo chamber where we only engage with those who share our curated views. He predicted the performative nature of online identity, where we craft a persona for a digital audience. He predicted the decline of original thought in favor of sharing and rebroadcasting the ideas of others. Most profoundly, he predicted the deep sense of alienation that can paradoxically arise from being more connected than ever before, a feeling of loneliness amidst a crowd of digital friends, a phenomenon psychologists now study as a hallmark of social media saturation. The story's climax is its title, "The Machine Stops." This perfect, seemingly infallible system, upon which all of humanity has become utterly dependent, begins to fail. First with small annoyances, a faulty sleeping apparatus, a poorly delivered lecture, and then with catastrophic system collapses. The civilization that outsourced all its thinking, all its living, to a technological deity has no idea how to function without it. They have forgotten even the most basic survival skills. They perish not with a bang, but with a whimper in the darkness of their cells, whispering of the God that failed them. Forster's warning is not against technology itself, but against the worship of it, against the willing surrender of our autonomy, our critical thought, and our direct experience of the world for the sake of convenience and comfort. His novella is a hauntingly beautiful and tragic prophecy, a century-old love letter urging us to never let the screen become more real than the sky, and to remember that a like is a poor substitute for a touch. In the hushed and often secretive world of 20th century mysticism, few names carry as much weight or controversy as that of Baba Vanga. Born Vangelia Pandeva Gushtarova in 1911, this blind Bulgarian woman, known simply as Vanga or Grandmother, would become one of the most famous clairvoyants of the modern era, a figure whose purported predictions continue to captivate and confound millions around the world. Blinded as a child by a terrifying tornado that allegedly left her with supernatural abilities, Vanga spent most of her long life in the small town of Petrich, where she held court for a constant stream of visitors, from common farmers seeking lost livestock to high-ranking Soviet officials and politicians desperate for a glimpse into the future. Her method was unique. She would enter a trance-like state, prescribing herbal remedies and offering visions that were often cryptic, symbolic, and open to a wide range of interpretations. The list of events her followers attribute to her is staggering in its scope and specificity. They claim she foresaw the precise year of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's death. She is said to have predicted the exact date of her own passing, March 11, 1996. Perhaps most chillingly, she is credited with foreseeing the nuclear catastrophe at Chernobyl in 1986, the collapse of the Soviet submarine Kursk in 2000, the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, and even the rise of the Islamic State or ISIS. Her predictions often took the form of vivid, allegorical images. For instance, she reportedly spoke of a great wave that would cover a coast and claim thousands, which adherents later mapped onto the Indian Ocean tsunami. She is said to have described two brothers of steel being attacked by birds of steel, a phrase interpreted by many as a prophecy of the 9/11 attacks. The central question, of course, is how a woman living in rural Bulgaria could possibly have accessed such detailed information about future global events. The most skeptical viewpoint offers a straightforward explanation: retroactive fitting, or the tendency to reinterpret vague statements after an event has occurred to make them seem specific. This is a well-documented psychological phenomenon, and it is the engine that powers the legacies of many so-called prophets. Baba Vanga's predictions were rarely recorded with the clinical precision of a laboratory experiment. They were shared verbally, passed through translators, and often written down by followers years after the fact. This creates a vast fertile ground for human error, selective memory, and confirmation bias. A statement like, "a great disaster will befall a northern power," could, after the fact, be applied to countless events, from Chernobyl to a winter storm, but it is only remembered and celebrated when it seems to match a major tragedy. Furthermore, the political context of her life cannot be ignored. For much of her later years, Bulgaria was behind the Iron Curtain, part of the Soviet bloc. The communist government, keen on finding any advantage, took a keen interest in her abilities. She was effectively a state employee for a time, and her predictions were reportedly studied by a secret government commission. This has led to theories that some of her more famous hits may have been less about supernatural vision and more about being a conduit for insider information or KGB disinformation campaigns, designed to create an aura of mystical certainty around the regime. Even the method of her predictions, often delivered in a trance state, makes them impossible to verify with any scientific rigor. There are no controlled conditions, no unbiased witnesses, only the compelling testimony of believers. Despite these rational criticisms, the enduring power of the Baba Vanga legend speaks to a deep and universal human need. In an unpredictable and often frightening world, the idea that the future is knowable, that there is a pattern and a plan, is profoundly comforting. Her story offers a sense of order amidst the chaos. For her followers, the sheer volume of attributed predictions and the emotional weight of the events they are tied to feels like more than mere coincidence. It feels like evidence of a connection to a higher knowledge, a thread of meaning woven through history. Whether one views her as a genuine psychic, a clever fabulist, or simply a blank screen upon which people project their fears and hopes, Baba Vanga remains a powerful cultural icon. Her legacy is a perfect case study in the enduring allure of prophecy, demonstrating that the most powerful predictions are not necessarily those that are accurate, but those that provide a story we desperately want to believe. It represents one of history's most profound and ironic reversals of scientific authority, a moment when one of the world's most brilliant minds declared a definitive end to human ambition, only to be proven spectacularly and publicly wrong in the blink of an eye. At the dawn of the 20th century, the dream of human flight was a tantalizing obsession. Inventors and eccentrics around the globe were building bizarre contraptions of wood, wire, and cloth, leaping from hillsides and often crashing in spectacular fashion. To the established scientific community, these efforts were not just futile, they were an embarrassment, a rejection of known physics by undisciplined amateurs. And no one represented the voice of that establishment more than Simon Newcomb. A renowned Canadian-American astronomer and mathematician, Newcomb was a titan of his age. He was a professor at Johns Hopkins University, the recipient of countless international awards, and a figure whose pronouncements on science were treated with near religious reverence. He had spent his career calculating the precise orbits of planets and the fundamental constants of the universe with impeccable accuracy. To him, the universe operated on knowable mathematical principles, and in 1906 he turned his formidable intellect to the question of powered flight. His conclusion, published in a widely read essay, was absolute and devastating. He declared that for a machine to carry a man through the air, it would require engines and propellers of an efficiency and lightness that simply defied the laws of physics as he understood them. The known materials of the day, wood, steel, fabric, were all too heavy. The internal combustion engine was too inefficient. He framed it not as a temporary technological hurdle, but as a permanent mathematical impossibility. His most famous and crushing line was that a successful flying machine would require the discovery of some new, entirely unknown material or force, and that anyone devoting their life to this pursuit was consigning themselves to a future of certain disappointment, a dream for which one would simply grow old and die waiting. The sheer weight of Newcomb's authority cannot be overstated. When he spoke, the world of science listened. His essay was not a casual opinion. It was a logical, equations-backed argument from a man who had dedicated his life to mathematical certainty. For the few serious researchers working on the problem of flight, like Samuel Langley at the Smithsonian, Newcomb's words were a dire warning. For the Wright brothers, two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, with no formal university training, it was likely just more background noise from an East Coast elite who didn't understand practical engineering. While Newcomb was writing his essay based on theoretical calculations, Wilbur and Orville Wright were in a North Carolina field conducting painstaking, hands-on experiments with a wind tunnel they built themselves. They weren't trying to discover a new law of physics. They were solving three critical, practical problems that Newcomb's abstract math had overlooked: lift, control, and propulsion. They focused on wing warping for lateral control, a movable rudder, and a lightweight, purpose-built engine. They were iterating, testing, and learning from failure in the real world, not just on paper. The irony, of course, is almost too perfect to be believed. On December 17, 1903, a mere 2 years after Newcomb's essay was published, the Wright brothers achieved sustained, controlled, powered flight at Kitty Hawk. They didn't use any new magical material or violate the laws of physics. They used a combination of spruce, muslin, wire, and a simple aluminum block engine, all existing technologies that Newcomb would have been intimately familiar with. Their genius was not in defying physics, but in understanding its nuances better than anyone else. They mastered the interplay of aerodynamics and control in a way that pure mathematical theory had failed to capture. Simon Newcomb, the great man of science, had been utterly and completely refuted by two persistent tinkerers operating out of a bicycle shop. The story doesn't end there, which adds a final layer of fascinating complexity. To his immense credit, Newcomb lived long enough to see the Wright brothers fly. He passed away in 1909, and his reaction was one of graceful, intellectual humility. He publicly revised his opinion, acknowledging the achievement and admitting that the Wrights had succeeded precisely by working outside the theoretical constraints he had so confidently laid out. They had found a practical path where he had only seen a theoretical dead end. This transformation is what makes his story so much more than a simple tale of a wrong prediction. It serves as a timeless cautionary tale against the hubris of scientific dogma, against the danger of declaring something impossible because current models cannot conceive of a solution. Newcomb's initial error was in confusing the boundaries of contemporary knowledge with the absolute boundaries of nature itself. His story reminds us that progress often comes not from the center of established authority, but from the edges, from the stubborn, determined minds willing to challenge that authority through direct experimentation. It is a powerful lesson about the difference between calculating what is known and daring to explore what might be possible. While Simon Newcomb's failed prediction was a story of scientific hubris, our next vision of the future stands as a hauntingly accurate forecast of a different kind of power, the power to engineer humanity itself. In 1932, as the world was reeling from economic collapse and flirting with totalitarian ideologies, the English author Aldous Huxley published a novel that would become a cornerstone of dystopian fiction. Brave New World presented a society that had achieved a terrifying form of perfection. There was no war, no poverty, no material want, but this utopian surface concealed a chilling reality. Humanity had been systematically stripped of its freedom, its individuality, and its very soul, not through brute force, but through the gentle, irresistible tools of biological and psychological engineering. Huxley's genius was in foreseeing that the greatest threat to human liberty might not be a boot stamping on a human face, but a perfectly designed world offering endless pleasure and comfort in exchange for everything that makes us human. The core of Huxley's predicted future is the hatchery and conditioning center, where human beings are no longer born but decanted. This single concept, so shocking to readers in the 1930s, resonates with profound force today. In the novel, citizens are genetically engineered and mass-produced in test tubes, their intelligence, physique, and predetermined role in society carefully calibrated before they are even biologically formed. Embryos are chemically treated to ensure they develop into one of 5 rigid castes, from the brilliant alpha elites down to the stunted, semi-mindless epsilons designed for manual labor. This is a world that has solved the problem of social unrest by eliminating the very possibility of ambition or envy. Everyone is perfectly happy in their preordained place. Huxley called this process Bokanovsky's process, and it serves as a stunningly direct prediction of the foundational technologies that would ignite the bioethical debates of our own century: in vitro fertilization and, more specifically, CRISPR gene editing. When Huxley was writing, the idea of manipulating human heredity was the stuff of eugenicist fantasy and science fiction. The structure of DNA wouldn't even be discovered for another 2 decades. Yet he intuitively grasped the logical endpoint of a society obsessed with efficiency and control. Today, we stand at the precipice of that very world. In vitro fertilization, or IV, has become a commonplace medical procedure, allowing for the conception of embryos outside the human body, just as Huxley described. And while we are not creating thousands of identical twins from a single egg, the science of preimplantation genetic testing allows prospective parents to screen embryos for certain genetic diseases and traits. This technology, a miraculous blessing for families facing hereditary illnesses, also opens the door to the kind of selective breeding Huxley warned against. The parallel becomes even more acute with the advent of CRISPR-Cas9, a revolutionary gene editing tool that acts like a pair of molecular scissors, allowing scientists to cut and paste DNA with unprecedented precision. This technology holds the promise of eradicating devastating genetic disorders, but it also carries the specter of creating designer babies, children engineered for enhanced intelligence, specific physical attributes, or even temperament. The ethical chasm here is exactly the one Huxley explored. Where do we draw the line between healing and enhancing, between therapy and consumer eugenics? The society in Brave New World didn't see itself as monstrous. It saw itself as rational and benevolent, having eliminated suffering by standardizing the human being. Our current debates over germline editing, which would make genetic changes heritable for all future generations, are the real-world echo of this fictional dilemma, forcing us to ask if we are wise enough to wield the power of creation without succumbing to the temptation of control. Yet Huxley's prediction extends far beyond the laboratory. He understood that physical control was only half the equation. To maintain a stable society, you must also engineer the mind. In his world, this is achieved through hypnopedia, or sleep teaching, where repeating phrases are whispered to sleeping children to instill lifelong beliefs and social prejudices. Everyone belongs to everyone else, the voice whispers, promoting promiscuity and eliminating the disruptive passion of exclusive love. Ending is better than mending. It intones, reinforcing a culture of consumption and disposability. This psychological conditioning ensures that citizens internalize the values of the state so completely that they would never even think to rebel. Their desires are perfectly aligned with the system's needs. This vision of behavioral programming finds its unsettling parallel in our own digital age, not through whispered slogans, but through the sophisticated algorithms of social media and targeted advertising. Our online experiences are increasingly curated by artificial intelligence designed to capture and hold our attention, to shape our preferences, and to reinforce our biases within personalized echo chambers. These platforms learn our deepest desires and fears, offering us a constant stream of content that keeps us engaged, consuming, and much like the citizens of the world state, distracted from deeper thought or civic engagement. The soma of Huxley's world, the perfect pleasure drug with no side effects that citizens take to escape any fleeting discomfort, is mirrored in our own culture of endless scrolling, on-demand entertainment, and pharmaceutical solutions for every form of existential unease. The goal is the same, a population that is pacified, content, and unlikely to question the underlying structures of their world. What makes Brave New World such an enduring and relevant prediction is that its tyranny is so seductive. Unlike Orwell's 1984, which depicts a future of punishment and fear, Huxley foresaw a future of addiction and pleasure. His characters are not tortured into submission. They are bribed into it with comfort, convenience, and sensual gratification. The central villain is not a menacing big brother figure, but the collective, well-intentioned urge to eliminate pain and suffering at any cost. The novel's tragic hero, John the Savage, who was raised outside this system on a Native American reservation, understands this distinction perfectly. He confronts the world controller, Mustafa Mend, and argues for the human right to be unhappy, to be imperfect, to feel pain and passion and art, all the messy, beautiful things that give life its meaning. In a line that cuts to the heart of our own modern anxieties, John declares that he claims the right to be unhappy. This is the ultimate warning of Huxley's prophecy, that in our quest for a perfect, painless world, we might inadvertently engineer away our very humanity, creating a gilded cage so comfortable that we never even notice we've lost the key. As the dust settled on the mechanized slaughter of the First World War, a phrase echoed across the smoldering battlefields and grieving nations, a grim epitaph for a generation: the war to end war. This haunting ideal, which would later morph into the war to end all wars, feels like a cruel joke in hindsight, a promise broken by the even greater cataclysm that followed just 2 decades later. Yet its origins are far more complex and intellectually nuanced than a simple, failed slogan. The prophecy was born not in a politician's speech, but in the mind of our previous visionary, H.G. Wells, in the opening weeks of the conflict, representing a desperate hope that this unprecedented violence could somehow be leveraged to create a permanent peace. In August 1914, as German troops marched through Belgium, Wells poured his frantic energy into a series of newspaper articles that were soon collected into a book titled The War That Will End War. For Wells, a committed socialist and internationalist, this was not a celebration of conflict but a terrifying necessity. He saw the authoritarian, militaristic regimes of Germany and Austria-Hungary as the last great obstacles to human progress. His argument was that this war was a unique and awful surgery, a final, brutal confrontation that would so thoroughly discredit the very idea of armed conflict between nations that it would force humanity to evolve beyond it. He wasn't predicting the war itself, he was predicting its ultimate, world-altering consequence. He wrote, "This is now a war for peace. It is a war to exercise a world madness and end an age." For him, the phrase was a call to arms with a utopian in point, a belief that you sometimes must wage a terrible war to secure a lasting peace, and that this would be the last time such a terrible price would ever need to be paid. Wells was far from alone in this sentiment. The idea that such a vast, industrialized conflict would be too horrifying to ever repeat was a common refrain. It was a logical conclusion drawn from the unprecedented scale of the carnage. This was the first truly modern war, featuring machine guns that could mow down thousands in minutes, artillery shells that rained down for weeks on end, and the chilling introduction of chemical weapons that suffocated men in their own trenches. The sheer mechanized efficiency of the killing was something new in human history, and many believed, or perhaps needed to believe, that no society would ever be willing to subject itself to such a bloodletting again. The war would be so awful that its memory alone would act as a vaccine against future conflicts. This was the prophecy, not just that the Allies would win, but that the very experience of the war would fundamentally rewire human nature and international politics. Of course, we know with the grim clarity of history that this prediction failed, and it failed catastrophically. The Treaty of Versailles, rather than creating a stable and just peace, humiliated Germany and planted the seeds of bitter resentment that would be harvested by the Nazi Party. The League of Nations, the very embodiment of Wells's internationalist dream, proved too weak and ineffective to prevent the rise of aggressive fascism. And just 21 years after the armistice, the world plunged into an even wider, more destructive war that featured the Holocaust and the atomic bomb. The war to end war had, in fact, paved the way for a conflict that made the first one look almost quaint by comparison. So was the prophecy merely a naive dream, a foolish hope shattered on the hard rocks of human nature? Not entirely. While it failed in its ultimate goal, it succeeded in a different, more profound way. It permanently changed our aspiration. For the first time, the idea of abolishing war altogether moved from the fringe of philosophical thought into the center of global political discourse. The sheer failure of the prediction created a burning urgency. The memory of the Great War's failure became the primary motivation for the architects of the post-World War II order. They looked at the rubble of Europe and understood that you could not just win a war and hope for peace. You had to actively, deliberately build the institutions to maintain it. This led directly to the creation of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Coal and Steel Community, which evolved into the European Union, and the NATO alliance, all designed explicitly to make war between major powers not just unthinkable but practically impossible. In this sense, H.G. Wells's prediction was not so much wrong as it was premature and incomplete. He correctly diagnosed that a shock of that magnitude was needed to jolt humanity out of its cycle of violence, but he underestimated the depth of the lesson that needed to be learned. The First World War was the warning shot, the second was the full impact. The prophecy of a war to end all wars was thus a crucial step in our moral evolution. It established the goal, even if the path to achieving it was far more complex and arduous than anyone in 1914 could have ever imagined. It stands as a heartbreaking lesson in the gap between our highest ideals and our flawed, complicated reality. A reminder that even our most profound failures can become the foundation for our greatest progress. But if Huxley envisioned a future pacified by pleasure and Wells hoped war would shock us into peace, our next prophet foresaw a different kind of quiet surrender, not of our bodies to the state, but of our attention to a relentless stream of personalized media. In 1953, as television sets were first blinking to life in living rooms across America, a young writer named Ray Bradbury was already warning of its seductive dangers. His seminal novel, Fahrenheit 451, is famous for its depiction of a future where firemen don't put out fires. They start them, burning books to suppress dissenting ideas and keep the population docile. But buried within this broader censorship is a much more intimate and, for our time, startlingly precise prediction: the invention of the modern earbud and the culture of constant, isolating media consumption it enables. Bradbury didn't call them earbuds or AirPods. His poetic genius gave them far more evocative names. He wrote of thimble radios, tiny devices that fit snugly in the ear, and of seashells, delicate electronic conches that whisper a never-ending stream of sound directly into the listener's head. His protagonist, Montag, finds his wife, Mildred, lying in bed, virtually comatose, with these little seashells tucked in her ears, the thimble radios tamped tight, and an electronic ocean of sound, of music and talk coming in on the shore of her unsleeping mind. This description, written 70 years ago, is a perfect portrait of someone lost in their own personalized audio world. A person physically present but mentally and emotionally absent, drowning in a curated digital ocean. He wasn't just predicting a piece of hardware, he was predicting the psychological experience of using it, the isolation, the disconnection from immediate reality, and the addictive nature of an endless audio feed. The parallels to our current reality are almost unnerving. Bradbury's seashells are our wireless earbuds. The electronic ocean of sound is the vast, on-demand universe of streaming music, podcasts, and audiobooks available from services like Spotify and Apple Music. Mildred's desperate need to be constantly plugged in, to avoid the silence and the uncomfortable thoughts it might bring, mirrors our own modern anxiety about being alone with our own minds. We use our own seashells to fill every moment of downtime, on the commute, at the gym, while cooking dinner, creating a permanent soundtrack that shields us from boredom, but also from reflection and genuine engagement with the world around us. Bradbury saw that the ultimate tool of distraction wouldn't be a large, shared screen in the living room, but a small, private one in our ears, making our retreat into mediated reality portable, personal, and inescapable. Bradbury's true insight, however, was in connecting this technology to the wider theme of his novel, the death of meaningful conversation and critical thought. In his world, the seashells and the massive, immersive parlor walls, his prediction of flat-screen, interactive television work in tandem to replace real human interaction with a shallow, sensationalized simulation. People in his world are not screaming in protest as their books are burned. They are largely indifferent because they have been seduced into a state of comfortable ignorance. They have traded the challenging, complex ideas found in literature for the soothing, simple, and endless chatter of their audio feeds. The technology isn't forced upon them. They embrace it willingly, using it to escape the anxieties and dissatisfactions of their own lives. This is perhaps his most profound and chilling prediction, that we might willingly participate in our own intellectual demise, choosing the comfortable, distracting murmur of the seashell over the difficult, rewarding work of thinking for ourselves. While the novel's central image is the burning of books, Bradbury himself clarified in later years that the story was never just about censorship. He said, "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them." The seashell radios are the perfect instrument for this. They represent a culture that has lost the patience for deep, linear narrative, for the quiet concentration required to read a book. They condition the brain for constant stimulation and quick cuts, for talk and music, making the slow, rich tapestry of a novel seem boring and passé. In this sense, Bradbury didn't just predict the invention of the earbud. He predicted the entire ecosystem of bite-sized, always-on audio content that competes for our attention and fundamentally rewires our cognitive habits. He foresaw a world where we are so busy listening to things that we forget how to listen to each other, and where the constant noise in our ears prevents us from ever hearing the still, small voice of our own conscience. While Ray Bradbury was warning of seashell radios and digital distraction, an entirely different vision of the future was being constructed out of plaster, optimism, and corporate ambition in Queens, New York. The 1964 World's Fair was a spectacular monument to mid-century American confidence, a place where giant unispheres symbolized global unity, and companies like General Motors and Ford dazzled visitors with visions of lunar rovers and underwater hotels. But perhaps no exhibit captured the imagination of what daily life could be like half a century hence more powerfully than the one sponsored by the Bell system, with creative contributions from Walt Disney's Imagineers. Their Picturephone exhibit didn't just offer a passive glance at the future. It invited visitors to step into a fully realized model home for the year 2014, a space where technology served humanity with effortless grace. The accuracy of some of their predictions is nothing short of breathtaking. The centerpiece of their display was, of course, the Picturephone itself. Visitors could see a working model of a video calling booth, a concept that felt like pure science fiction at a time when most homes still had rotary dial phones. The exhibit's narrators spoke confidently of a future where we would be able to see the person we were talking to, making business deals and connecting with family across vast distances. They correctly predicted the infrastructure challenge too, noting that this would require vast new networks of coaxial cables or waveguides to handle the immense amount of data, a prescient nod to the fiber optic internet that would indeed become the backbone of our modern communication. Today, the once astonishing concept of video calling is not just a reality but a mundane feature of our computers and smartphones, a tool we use for everything from corporate meetings to reading bedtime stories to grandchildren. Their vision extended far beyond the phone. Walking through the model home, visitors saw flat-screen television sets hanging on the walls, displaying art and receiving news broadcasts. This was a staggering leap of imagination in an era dominated by heavy, furniture-sized cathode ray tube TVs encased in wooden consoles. The exhibit also showcased a form of home automation that feels utterly familiar today. They demonstrated appliances that could be programmed to start dinners, climate control systems that adjusted themselves, and even a form of remote control for the home's functions. They essentially predicted the smart home, complete with what we would now call the Internet of Things. Furthermore, they showed a security device that used electrical pulses to immobilize an intruder, a non-lethal weapon that they called a taser, a name and a concept that has become a standard part of law enforcement and civilian security. Yet, for all their remarkable hits, the future they painted was also filtered through a distinctly 1960s lens, leading to some predictions that seemed charmingly quaint or wildly off the mark from our 21st century vantage point. Their optimism about atomic energy was boundless. They envisioned clean, safe nuclear power not just for cities, but for individual homes, with miniature reactors quietly providing limitless electricity. The idea that society would welcome fission reactors in suburban basements speaks to a profound faith in technological mastery that would be severely tempered by the accidents at 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. Their architectural vision was also a product of its time. They forecasted entire cities under climate-controlled domes, a popular trope in mid-century futurism that overlooked the incredible social and psychological cost of living in a completely artificial environment. Perhaps the most poignant miss was their certainty about space colonization. Fresh with the excitement of the Mercury and Gemini programs, the exhibit's narrative assured visitors that by 2014, we would not only have a permanent base on the Moon, but would also be well on our way to establishing settlements on Mars. They envisioned lunar mining operations and a bustling economy in orbit, a future where the final frontier was just another place for industry and commerce. This wasn't a fringe idea, it was a widely held expectation among scientists and engineers of the day. The fact that we have not yet established these colonies isn't a failure of technology, but rather a reallocation of ambition and funding toward robotic exploration and problems here on Earth like climate change and computing. What makes the world's fair predictions so fascinating is the blend of acute foresight and contextual blindness. They correctly identified the technological capabilities that would emerge: miniaturization, global communication, automation. But they often misunderstood the human and economic factors that would shape their adoption. They assumed the future would be built by the same large, monolithic corporations that sponsored the pavilions like AT&T and General Electric. They could not have foreseen the disruptive, decentralized force of the digital revolution, driven by startups in garages and the open-source sharing of information. They predicted the gadgets but not the internet's anarchic spirit. They imagined the flat screen but not the streaming services that would fill it. Their future was polished, corporate, and orderly, while our reality is fragmented, personal, and wonderfully chaotic. This disconnect gives their predictions a unique charm, serving as a time capsule not only of what they thought would happen, but of who they were, a society looking ahead with one eye on the stars and the other firmly on the corporate balance sheet, dreaming of a tomorrow built by the giants of today. While visions of corporate futurism at the World's Fair painted an optimistic, orderly tomorrow, the turn of the millennium saw a very different kind of prediction capture the global imagination, one rooted not in transistors and innovation, but in ancient stone and celestial cycles. As the year 2012 approached, a phrase seeped from academic circles and fringe websites into the very mainstream of global culture: the end of the Mayan calendar. It was a prediction that seemed to carry the weight of a lost civilization, a prophecy of such finality that it spawned Hollywood blockbusters, countless documentaries, and a pervasive, low-grade cultural anxiety that for some bordered on genuine panic. The narrative was seductively simple. An ancient, sophisticated culture had calculated a precise date for the end of the world, and that date was December 21st, 2012. But this interpretation was a profound and dramatic misreading, a classic case of projecting our own fears onto a complex historical artifact. To understand what the Mayan calendar actually signified, we must first appreciate its breathtaking sophistication. The Maya were master timekeepers, and their system wasn't a single calendar but an interlocking set of cycles. They had the Hob, a 365-day solar year, and the Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred cycle. But the one that sparked the doomsday speculation was the long count, a linear count of days from a mythological starting point that scholars correlate with August 11th, 3114 before the Common Era. This long count operates in cycles much like our own odometer. The primary unit was the Baktan, a period of 144,000 days, or roughly 394 years. The completion of the 13th Baktan was the event set for December 21, 2012. In the Maya worldview, this was not an end but a monumental turning of the page. It was the conclusion of a grand cycle and the beginning of the next, a time for renewal and cosmic rebalancing, not for destruction. The transformation of this cyclical renewal into an apocalyptic prophecy is a fascinating story of modern myth-making. The idea didn't originate with the ancient Maya themselves, but was largely constructed in the 20th century. Early Mayanist scholars, in their translations, noted the end of the 13th Baktan as a significant chronological marker. This academic footnote was then amplified and distorted as it passed through various filters. Western authors, particularly in the New Age and counterculture movements of the 1960s and 70s, began to imbue this date with spiritual significance, often blending it with Nostradamus, I Ching, and other prophetic systems. The concept tapped into a deep, recurring theme in human history: millennialism, the belief in a coming cataclysm that will cleanse the world and pave the way for a new golden age. By the 1990s, the idea had fully crystallized, propelled by the burgeoning internet, which acted as a perfect accelerant for this kind of viral, speculative folklore. What makes the 2012 phenomenon so compelling is how perfectly it showcases our tendency to interpret ambiguity through the lens of our own contemporary anxieties. The turn of the millennium had already put the concept of a global reset in the air, fueled by Y2K fears. As 2012 drew nearer, these anxieties found a new vessel. Climate change, political instability, economic crises, the modern world felt increasingly precarious. The Maya, often romanticized as mysterious and wise seers who had somehow vanished, provided a seemingly authoritative voice from the past that appeared to confirm our deepest fears about the present. We weren't just making it up. A brilliant ancient civilization had supposedly seen it coming. The truth, however, is that the ancient Maya were far more concerned with the intricate dance of time and the maintenance of cosmic order than with predicting a specific doomsday. In fact, their inscriptions make reference to dates thousands of years beyond 2012, clearly demonstrating they anticipated a future that stretched far past this cyclical milestone. The day itself, December 21, 2012, arrived and passed with a notable lack of celestial fire or dimensional collapse. The world did not end. Instead, the date became a global cultural event, a bizarre mixture of solemn expectation, festive celebration, and commercial opportunism. From Mayan villages in Guatemala holding traditional ceremonies to welcome the new cycle, to massive parties at ancient archaeological sites like Chichen Itza, to individuals stockpiling supplies in remote bunkers, humanity responded to the prophecy in every way imaginable. In the aftermath, the 2012 phenomenon left behind a valuable lesson. It wasn't about the accuracy of an ancient prediction, but about our own powerful need to find patterns and meaning, especially in times of uncertainty. The Maya gave us a calendar, but we wrote the apocalypse upon it ourselves. The story endures not as a failed prophecy, but as a perfect case study in how history can be misunderstood, repackaged and consumed, revealing far more about the fears of the present than it ever could about the intentions of the past. From the intricate sketches of Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines to the haunting digital seashells of Ray Bradbury's imagination, our journey through these 30 astonishing predictions reveals something far greater than a simple list of lucky guesses. It uncovers a fundamental thread in the tapestry of human history, our relentless, audacious drive to reach beyond the horizons of our own time. We've seen how this foresight manifests in different forms, through the scientific deduction of a Robert Boyle, the narrative genius of a Jules Verne, the chilling accuracy of a Morgan Robertson, and the tragic hubris of a Simon Newcomb. Some predictions were born from meticulous calculation, others from vivid nightmares, and a few from coincidences so precise they still send a shiver down the spine. What unites them all is a testament to the boundless power of the human mind. It's a power that allows a Nikola Tesla to envision a world connected by invisible networks from his isolated laboratory, and a Mark Twain to find a poetic symmetry between his own life and the celestial dance of a comet. This isn't just about being right, it's about the courage to be wrong, to imagine something so boldly that it inspires generations to turn that fantasy into fact. These visionaries dared to look at the world not just as it was, but as it could be, and in doing so, they handed us the blueprints for our present reality. Now we stand at our own moment in history, surrounded by our own marvels and our own anxieties. We have scientists working on quantum computing, gene editing, and artificial intelligence. We have storytellers and filmmakers dreaming of interstellar travel and virtual worlds. So this leaves us with one final, compelling question to ponder. Which of the ideas from our own era will future generations look back on with that same sense of awe and wonder? Which of our seemingly impossible dreams will they see as the obvious precursor to their everyday world? Will it be the promise of a multiplanetary species, the merging of human and machine consciousness, or perhaps a solution to climate change that we have yet to fully imagine? The conversation doesn't have to end here. We want to hear from you. Which of these historical predictions amazes you the most? Was it the eerie foreshadowing of the Titanic's demise or the elegant logic of Arthur C. Clarke's geostationary orbit? Share your favorite in the comments below and tell us why it captures your imagination. If you've enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of the past, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the incredible, the unexplained, and the utterly fascinating corners of history. The future is always watching the past, waiting to see which dreams we dare to make real.